I do. I do.
So thank you.
So thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I don't know if this is too loud, too soft. I mean, I'll leave it to you. Okay. Guys, thanks for being here. Let me hear who's in the room right now. Can we just go around and we talked a little bit? How about in the back there? Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle. I work with Bridges. I'm with Children's Home Society.
Oh, good. Okay.
So I'm collaborating with Salon Baldwin. We started a support group of parents that have children with autism.
Wonderful.
So I thought it would be great to come and get some information to share with us.
Oh, that's so wonderful, and thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for being here, and hopefully I can help you with knowing what to share, in addition to what you're doing, right? Because sleep is pretty important. That's one thing I want to get across today. So wonderful, thank you.
So I am Walker Baldwin, and I work with STAR. I'm a grant and program called Little House.
Okay.
And it's a training for parents of children who are newly diagnosed.
Yeah.
So we work with 18 months to 5 or 6.
Okay. Well, very good. Welcome. Wonderful. Okay. Wonderful. Where are you based out of? Jupiter. Oh, that's wonderful. Leave me your card. Okay. Hi. Card. And card. And we talked this morning. Awesome. Yeah, yeah. Some of us are getting some credits, right? Okay. And can I ask you?
My name is Nadia Cholobadia. I'm a grandparent of 3 autistic children.
Okay.
And I want to get as much information as I can whenever I saw these ads on the nurse, and I'm so sorry to be the first. But I'm here.
You didn't miss anything because we're going to go over here. So you're good. You're good. Thank you for being here, and I hope to be helpful to you. Okay? Once again, thank you to CARD. Thank you for having me. This is an honor for me to do. It's really a pleasure. So for those of you who were here earlier, for the earlier one today, that was geared more toward parents, you will see a lot of the same material. However, we've got a little bit more time, and I've put a little bit more meat on the bone for this part here today. All right. And I guess I should say this also, that as far as who I am for everybody online and new people in the room here, I am a licensed psychologist. I'm also a board-certified behavior analyst, and I direct the Boys Town Behavioral Health Clinic based out of West Palm. And we also have co-location sites with Palm Beach Pediatrics in Boynton and Palms West. So that's fun to do. So we're helping a lot of kids. Now, our objectives today for the general population as well as for children along the autism spectrum, we want to talk about common sleep problems with kids, how they affect daily functioning, and how we can best address them. And I do want to say this. This is a really big topic. And so you won't get everything that you need from me today. I like to say I'm just introducing you to. You have to take it from there, okay? So prevalence of sleep problems, let's talk about that. 7 of 10 parents report concern about their children's sleep. They report that to pediatricians. 3 of 10 parents report child sleep problems 3 or more nights per week by age 4. And by the way, before I go further, let me make this point. This is not just for kids with autism that I'm talking about today. And those of you who work with children with autism, who are grandparents or parents of children with autism, there are likely other children in the house as well. So we want to make sure that they're getting good sleep. And when the kids are getting good sleep, guess who else is getting good sleep? Parents. And if you're doing parent work, if you're training parents, what do you need from them? You need treatment adherence, or else nothing works, right? So we need them to be tip-top as well. 10% of families are under significant stress just due to infants crying and sleep problems. Almost 9 of 10 parents with children with neurodevelopmental disorders report sleep problems in their children. 9 of 10. 9 of 10, that's a lot. Almost 9 of 10 children with anxiety have sleep problems. What do we know about children on the spectrum? They're also pretty anxious for the most part. Almost 9 of 10 adolescents live in a relatively constant state of sleep deprivation by 2 to 3 hours under where they need to be. And they always say it's because of homework, but they're also chatting with their friends on whatever they're using these days. I'll say. Adolescents need at least 9 hours per night. Oh, there it is right there. Delayed sleep phase seen in up to about 16% of young adults, meaning that they get enough sleep or they want enough sleep. They want to stay in bed that long, but they're not sleepy around 10, 11 o'clock at night. If you let them fall asleep when they were sleepy, they would get enough sleep. But the problem is the world isn't structured that way. They have to go to school. Associated problems here, poor sleep increases the risk of suppressed immune system and illness. By the way, when I give this kind of talk on pediatric sleep to physicians, this is the one that really makes their eyes pop because some of this they knew, but some of this they don't. Suppressed immune system and more illness as a result of poor sleep, so they get more colds, they're more susceptible to flu and things like that, but also it suppresses immune function, which means that vaccinations aren't as helpful. Obesity and diabetes, hypertension, problems with cholesterol. For those who are in their teen years, we don't want them falling asleep at the wheel. Behavioral health diagnoses like ADHD and mood disorders, poor behavioral regulation, temper tantrums. Essentially, behavior stuff, emotional and behavioral stuff that we diagnose in mental health. We see more of that with less sleep. We have academic, vocational, and social problems. There's an increased risk of things like Alzheimer's disorder, which we'll talk about soon. Also, it doubles cancer risk. So I could probably keep going with this, but you see that sleep is really central to our functioning. Not only biologically, medically, but also how we just get through our day adaptively. Now, let's talk about physiology of sleep. There's what's called the two-process model of sleep regulation. So we've got a couple of categories of factors that help regulate sleep. One of them is what's called process S, and that has to do with sleep pressure or just how sleepy you feel right now and what factors go into that. And also process C, which is, I guess it's called C because of circadian rhythm, circadian timing. And so let's talk about the first one. So process S, it's the need to sleep. It's what we call sleep pressure in sleep medicine. That's the homeostatic drive. It's how, it's like I said, how sleepy you feel. Now, there's a neurotransmitter called adenosine, and adenosine builds up almost like a sand timer throughout the day. As long as you're awake, adenosine is building up, okay? And when you sleep, it goes down. The higher that level is, the more you feel you need to sleep. Now, something else too is that we see decreases in sleep pressure between the ages of 3 and 5. And by the way, that's when we start seeing fewer naps, right? Right around the age 3, 4, 5. And over the early childhood years, where we start seeing a circadian phase preference, and then also between 12 and 18 years of age, which is delayed circadian phase, it's a naturally later bedtime, and that's why, for example, my son just started middle school this year, and I can't believe how late he's going to school. They changed start times finally because of the research on this. Process C it has to do with circadian timing. Now that's regulated by a really, really tiny part of your brain, about 20,000 neurons, which is teeny tiny, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. That is where your sleep clock lives, I guess. And that is on a daily basis, if not hourly basis, reprogrammed all the time by what we know as Zeitgebers. And I do not know why we say that in German, but it's a German word in the literature. And it basically is time cues in our environment. The biggest Zeitgeber category is what the sun does. Think about the sun going up and down from our point of view. And two things happen when the sun goes up, and that is it gets warmer and it gets lighter. And when the sun goes down, it gets dimmer and it gets cooler. Okay, so think right now about modern life. I'm not talking about millions of years of evolution up to this moment. I'm not talking about the 120 or 30,000 years that we've been a species. Okay, think about the fact that on that gigantic timeline, we've got about maybe 100 years of, I don't know, maybe 50 years of having electric light, longer than that, 80, 90 years of having electric light in our house. And about, what, 60 years maybe of controlling the climate indoors. Something to think about. Like, we've actually done that now as a species. It's cooler in here even though it's hotter outside. And so it doesn't have to change. And yet we've evolved, as far as our sleep patterns, to need temperature cues and light cues. But look what we do with light. When it gets dark outside, we turn on all the lights. Not only that, over the past 15 years or so, we've also had handheld devices that mimic the sun. Isn't this a mess? And on top of that, we also have the fluorescent curly Q light bulbs and all this stuff that put just as much, if not more, blue wavelength light that is coming from the devices as well. So, in other words, we're being bombarded now with kind of evolutionarily brand new factors to thwart our healthy sleeping. If you know this, well, then you can make some changes, right? Okay, so melatonin, by the way, is instrumental in process C because we create our own melatonin. We talked about that earlier today. But we create our own melatonin. Everybody's popping these pills. And it turns out that if you know the factors that allow melatonin to flow versus ebb, depending upon the time of day, then you're going to see a lot better sleep, not only in yourself, but your children or anybody else who you're helping. We'll talk about that really soon. But anyway, the Zeitgebers here, light, dark transitions, but also the associations that you make between the time of day and what you're doing in your daily routine. So whatever pattern, whatever habit pattern you're in, if we're having problems getting the kids to bed, for example, let's say the bedtime is ideally 8 o'clock, but they usually don't get to bed till about 11, right, or 10. You need to ask yourself, what's leading up to bedtime over that maybe hour or 2 hours right before intended bedtime? Is it conducive to falling asleep soon, or is it, or are we running around the house? Are we using our iPad? And those kinds of things. You see that? So if we change some things leading up to bedtime, well, then we're much more likely to see, more melatonin flow, and also we're starting to make new associations between, here it is, almost bedtime, and by the way, the lights are dim, TV's off, no tablets, no phone or iPad. We're starting to talk very slowly and gently. And now we're reading a bedtime story. Lights are getting dimmer, right? And we're going to do that every day, or every evening, I should say, to try to make that a routine, to make it predictable. The more predictable that is, the more easily the time of day, meaning it's almost bedtime, works as a Zeitgeber in and of itself. And that's what we want to. Any questions about this? Okay, good stuff? All right. Now, when it comes to polysomnography, this is a good graphic here, because I want everybody to see whenever a child goes through a sleep study, this is typically what they go through as far as the sensors used. There's electrodes that are measuring brainwave activity, eye movements, because brainwave and eye movements allow us to know what sleep stage they're in. When eyes are moving, you know what stage that is, right? Dream sleep or REM, right? Muscle activity, that, like with the leg EMG, for example, it allows us to know whether or not they're kicking at night, those kinds of things. Heart activity as well. We want to look at O2 saturation, end-tidal CO2. That's the nose, so we look at waste gas. We look also at respiratory effort. That's the bands around the chest to see, the rhythm of breathing. And also general video and audio, so that we can kind of zoom out and see, the totality of the sleep experience along with the others. So with that, I want to show you this. On the left-hand side, you see the different EEG readings. This is brain wave activity, if you will, telling us what stage a child's sleep is in. So there's wakefulness. And by the way, this wakefulness here, awake at the very top on the left. We'll talk about the right-hand side in a minute, but on the left here, see awake at the top. That is relaxed, eyes closed, but awake. So alpha activity is that. Beta activity on the right at the top there is where you're starting to relax even further. You're starting to fall into stage 1 sleep. Stage 1 sleep is what we call theta activity. Stage 2 sleep, we start seeing the spindles and K complexes. That's how we know that we're getting deeper. And stage 3 and stage 4 represent deeper sleep. Stage 4 is the deepest sleep because we see delta activity. And now, REM sleep is rapid eye movement, and that is a completely different phase, I like to point out, than deep sleep. REM sleep is not deep sleep. In fact, it's your brain during stage 4 sleep is basically kind of as if you put your computer to sleep. It's using very little CPU, energy. It's not doing too much. It's just maintaining the basics, but that's it. It's resting. That's what stage 4 sleep is. But REM sleep, look at the fact that you've got some theta activity, but you've also got some beta activity there, which is very similar to being awake or stage 1. So your mind is almost as alert, if not as alert, as being awake. But you're asleep, and the switch is flipped so that you don't act out your dreams. You're paralyzed. That's how we know that if there's any parasomnias, like sleepwalking or sleep talking, anything like sleep terrors, anything like that, we know that's not dream sleep. Very, very often, I'd say 99% it's not dream sleep. That's deep sleep. That's usually in the first third of the night, which I'll show you here on the right-hand side. Now, on the right-hand side here is what we call sleep architecture. This is a typical 8-hour night for an adult. With children, we just extend it. You see here, we've got EEG stages on the y-axis, wakefulness, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. And you see how awake corresponds to the W. See that? And we've got sleep 1 stage right there, 2, 3, 4. And then we also have REM sleep. You see the rectangles up there. All along the top there, this is the hours at the bottom. Now, we've got deep sleep in the first quarter to a third of the night. When you think about how sleep, as well as our species, evolved, we still don't know exactly why we sleep. We know what happens when we don't sleep, but we still don't know where it came from or why. And those are big questions. but here, it makes sense that if deep sleep is let me back up. Deep sleep is most associated with renewal and repair of the physical body, cellular repair. When we're talking about children, we're talking about hormonal release during the night, like growth hormone is released at night, and those kinds of things. All that is happening during deep sleep. Lighter sleep is about 2/3 or so of the night, and it's later in the night, not the beginning of the night. And REM sleep right here is most associated with kind of cognitive functioning, like memory consolidation. If you get really good sleep and enough REM sleep in a night, you do much better on tasks requiring attention, vigilance, short-term, long-term memory, like those kinds of tasks. It's easier for you if you've had enough REM sleep. So it makes sense, I think, that the deep sleep is associated most with the beginning of the night because, you think about the fact that before, 11,000 years ago, it's said by anthropologists that we kind of developed civilization. How we know is that we started to wear shoes. and sell things. but that's about 11,000, maybe 14,000 years ago, like somewhere in there. But then we've got maybe, 120,000 years of our species before we got to that point. And that was before the millions of years of evolution leading to that, right? So think about the fact that deep sleep must be associated with physical health, right? You get enough sleep, but you can't stay asleep for 8 or 9 hours because you might be mauled by an animal. It's a safety issue. It's a survival issue. So deep sleep is pretty important. You get that first. Now, it's a luxury to get the lighter sleep and the REM sleep. It's a luxury. I'm talking, like evolutionary biology here. I'm not talking about psychology, but I'm just talking about how that's really important to have for our modern society, but not for survival. Does that make sense? But in our modern, and this is the big point here, modern society requires us to be tip-top when it comes to memory, all of those things. So we need that too. Something else I want to point out. Do you see how short the REM cycle is right here, or the REM stage? Well, look what happens as you go farther out, like deeper into the night, is that they get longer. That's because there's less deep sleep taking up the night. So with less deep sleep, you get more lighter sleep, but with lighter sleep, you also get more REM stage. Why am I telling you this? Because I think we're here for the most part because we know at least one person that isn't getting enough sleep. If you're not getting enough sleep, let's say that you don't get a third of the sleep that you need. You're missing half your REM. And our kids, especially with autism spectrum disorders, can't afford that. They can't afford that because as a behavior analyst, I want to see, I don't only want to help them learn a task or a skill, academic or whatever. I want them to learn, but I want to make it easier on me to teach it to them. And I don't want to have to keep repeating the lesson. I want them to hold on to the lesson. Does that make sense? So they won't do that if they're not getting enough sleep. So that's why sleep is what I'm shouting from the mountaintop to mental health practitioners, behavior analysts. That's got to be part of your repertoire. You have to do that. You have to look at sleep, because if you don't fix that, then you're going to work 3 times as hard as you have to. When it comes to neural connections, we're really talking about cortical plasticity here and how the brain constantly adapts to the world in which you live. And anything that you do motorically over and over again tends to kind of get baked in, like driving a stick shift. That's hard at first. But then after a while, you can drive 1,000 miles and not look down at the gearbox. How did that happen? What's going on there? It's because your brain wired for it. It myelinated. Things that you used to do but are not doing anymore gets demyelinated, and resources go to other neuronal pathways. And that's what we call pruning, like pruning a shrub. So here's what we need to know about this, is that REM is associated with better memory consolidation, those kinds of things, memory recall, attentional vigilance. So we know that REM stage serves to strengthen neuronal pathways. Non-REM sleep, which is everything else, tends to prune what isn't being used. Interesting, right? There's direct implication there for what we're doing with the kids we serve or the kids we're raising. We want them to have as much REM as possible. Any questions? What are your thoughts right now? What's going through your mind? Pretty important. Something else we just discovered a few years ago is that there's something called the glymphatic clearance system. Your brain is not just brain cells as far as neurons. There's also what's called glial cells. And when you're asleep, those shrink. And when they shrink, there's more intracellular space. And cerebrospinal fluid can get in there and flush through. And that's taking out toxins, essentially, as well as soluble proteins. And I said this earlier today, that soluble proteins are what are implicated in the development of dementia, especially Alzheimer's. We all need to heed this. The better sleep you get, the less risk you are at when it comes to developing dementia. And we think maybe this is a big piece of that puzzle. All right, let's talk about melatonin. The melatonin regulatory pathway is, now let me back up. Like I said earlier, in this session, we make our own melatonin. Our bodies and our brains produce that. We don't necessarily need to pop the pill. Your eyes, believe it or not, lots of parts of your eyes and your tear ducts actually produce melatonin. The suprachiasmatic nucleus within the hypothalamus does as well. But the vast majority of it is produced by the pineal gland, or the pineal gland. I've heard that pronounced in different ways. But anyway, so it's the pineal gland. Now, to switch on the melatonin, this is switching on, like there's a switch, right? This is really, really good information, I think, when it comes to working with families. We need to consider the time cues, or the Zeitgebers. And so that's light, temperature, and also stimulus control considerations. We need 10 minutes of direct sunlight during the day. It seems that we need it for melatonin production. We need to be outside. There needs to be bright light. Our skin needs to feel the sun. Use traditional light bulbs and dim lights in the afternoon or evening. Turn the thermostat down a few degrees about a half hour to an hour before bedtime, because that again is mimicking what I call caveman days, before this, everything that we've built around ourselves now that doesn't really help us. No electronics an hour before bedtime. You'll see everywhere, including the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine, they say turn all that off 30 minutes before bedtime. But I like to say that let's say an hour before, because if you just say half hour, there's going to be some, there's going to be a tug of war with the devices into that half hour. Let's make sure we get a solid half hour at least without it. All right. Consistent schedule and routine. And then again, when it comes to stimulus control, especially with the bed, when you get into bed or when your child gets into bed and you turn off the lights, you get in bed, you cover yourself with the sheet and the blanket, and your head hits the pillow. That should be the most powerful set of cues for sleep being imminent. So especially for behavior analysts in the room, you want to ask yourself, what is bedtime paired with historically with that child? It could be that, here's the habit pattern the child is into, is they get in bed, and then within a minute they get back up and ask for a glass of water or something like that. If they practice that over and over again, then that's what's going to come natural to them tomorrow night. We need to break that cycle, and we can talk about that in a minute. So I say no sleeping anywhere but the bed, and do nothing but sleep in the bed. So in other words, it's 100% association. When I'm in bed, I fall asleep quickly. And there's nothing else I do there. Let's talk about medications. I like saying that we prescribe sleep, not sleeping pills. It's important to know that a lot of the medications that our children are taking could have side effects when it comes to sleep, and I like to talk about this a little bit. Clonidine is something that's used especially with stimulants. So when stimulants are being used for ADHD type symptoms, if they're not falling asleep because of the stimulant, well then they might be given a low dose clonidine to kind of bring them back down. The problem with that though is that clonidine, as well as the SSRIs, like the we're talking about like Prozac, Paxil, Lexapro, those. They suppress REM sleep, and we don't want to suppress REM sleep. few more things about melatonin is that melatonin only signals that it's nighttime. It doesn't cause sleep. That's something that most people who prescribe it, who say, you should really go ahead and give them the melatonin just to get rolling here with bedtime. It's important to know that you can't just, the pill won't make that happen because there's all kinds of other considerations. Behavior analysts, I think, are more prone to immediately see that because it's about context. It's not just about biology. It's about the biology and the environment interaction, you see. And so we got to think about all those other factors as well. Melatonin use with developmentally disabled population. Now this is just looking at whether or not it was effective and whether or not it was safe. And there was a study in 1996 that looked at this pretty well. And it turns out that a low dose improved sleep disturbances in 8 of 10 cases, and over 4 years' time, they didn't find any real side effects. That's good news. So it is an option for pediatricians and neurologists and other folks who are helping. But that's only one study. And as you know, you're looking at the preponderance of the findings across studies. We also know that, for example, in that study maybe didn't pick it up, but there is next day drowsiness in about 20% of patients. Also, it can interfere with blood pressure and diabetes management. So in other words, if you've got a child on your caseload, for example, or if it's your own child who does have diabetes and has sleep problems, well then, for example, that's something to consider. One more thing about this is that you can get a prescription of melatonin. That's FDA approved. But there are all kinds of products out there that are not FDA approved. The thing I like about FDA approval is that at least we know what's in the bottle. And if it's not FDA approved, if it's something from GNC or something like that, you get right off the shelf. We don't know what's in it. We don't know what else is in it. And the dose, the dosage in that per pill tends to vary wildly, even in the same bottle. So one thing about behavior analysis is that when you think in behavior analytical terms, you want to control for extraneous variables as you're moving forward, but that's one variable you really can't control because you don't know what the next pill has. Yes, ma'am. That's a fantastic question, Noelle. I don't know the answer, but I don't know. But that's a great question. That's a great question. If you find it, let me know, and I'll let you know if I find it. You're going to make me think about that. Okay, I want to talk about sleep and ADHD real briefly because kids with autism. I said this to a gentleman earlier today that we were talking about differential diagnosis, and who here knows or uses the DSM system? So few. All right, and the DSM, the DSM-4, which is the one prior to the 5, which we're using now, basically said if it's autism spectrum, then adding ADHD, for example, or anxiety has got to be way overboard for you to diagnose that too. And so the DSM-5 loosened the criteria on an awful lot of stuff. And so now under the DSM-5, if you're following it the way your professors told you to, almost every child comes away with more than one diagnosis, right? The way I've always seen it, maybe it's just a function of when I was trained. If a child has autism, if there's an ASD present, my God, that comes with a lot of stuff. It does, It comes with speech and language issues. It comes with anxiety. It comes with ADHD. It may be coming from a different place than what we think kind of just an ADHD case is, but nonetheless, in other words, for a kid with ADHD, not autism, they're interested socially, right? So they want to please the teacher. At least that's there, And with severe autism, for example, we know that for the most part, that's not a motivator for the child. And so maybe that's where the distractibility is coming from. There's no internal motivation, if you will, to please the teacher, right? So you got to look at all those little facets when you get a new case and you don't know what's happening yet. But in any event, ADHD is now being diagnosed right alongside most, I'd imagine, most cases of autism spectrum disorder. You see ADHD listed too, yes? Yeah? Okay, so even if it's not diagnosed, we've still got the same concerns. Child is, distractible, impulsive. All right, so poor sleep makes misdiagnosis of ADHD more likely because the signs of ADHD, the symptoms, the behavioral symptoms, if you will, line up perfectly with the symptoms of sleep deprivation. And also, 75 to 80% of kids with ADHD are chronically sleep deprived. To me, that means that we're misdiagnosing an awful lot of these kids. We're not seeing the sleep deprivation because it's not being asked. Most pediatricians don't ask that question, for example, about sleep. They don't ask about sleep. They give parents the Vanderbilt checklist, for example, and all that looks at is like the biggies in child psychology, which is ADHD, oppositional, and anxiety, and those kinds of things. Doesn't ask about sleep. Poor sleep and ADHD produce decreased glucose metabolism in the prefrontal cortex. Maybe that's what ADHD is in a lot of these cases, and it might be where a lot of those symptoms are coming from in a case of autism. We know that improving sleep improves an ADHD profile. Not only is that what I do on a daily basis in my clinic, but that's also some research that I've done with the University of Nebraska recently. We found that. What exactly are psychostimulants treating in each case? So if a child has ADHD or autism and ADHD, and they're sleep deprived, but we're not really thinking about that, and we give them a stimulant, what are we treating? A stimulant. What are we treating? Are we treating ADHD or are we treating the sleep deprivation? That's a big thought, I think. All right. Now, this is kind of cool. I didn't present this morning, because that was more for parents, but I want to share this with you. This is something that we're writing up right now. This is Katie Kidwell's dissertation in Nebraska. These are data from my clinic. I have the patients, and she has the time to write it up. So that's why it was a really, really nice collaboration. Anyway, so what we found, and Tim Nelson there is her chair. Anyway, one of the analyses that we did here was we wanted to look at effect sizes as well as normalization rates. So effect sizes means like, bang for our buck, what did it look like? And not only that, but normalization rates. That means that a child comes in with a diagnosis, we do a treatment, what percentage of that group no longer meets criteria? Did we normalize the functioning? In other words, did we cure it in a way, right? Child is not diagnosable anymore. And we took our data and we compared it in terms of those two measures, those two variables, with published manualized treatments for pediatric anxiety and for depression, for ADHD, and adolescent depression as well. And what we found was pretty cool. We found that pre-post measures for ADHD, pre-post measures, just by fixing sleep. These kids didn't come to us for sleep problems. They came to us for ADHD. We just fixed sleep. And guess what we found? We found that we had larger effect sizes and normalization rates than all this other stuff that was published. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I congratulated her for that finding on her dissertation. That's publishable. But having said that, though, what's the big idea there? What's the big picture thought there? The big picture thought is we keep missing sleep. Who knows how many of those other kids in those other studies, the ones that aren't highlighted, also had sleep problems, but it wasn't identified or addressed. Now, this is another data set, and I've got probably 100 little pieces like this, and I only gave you 6 of them just to give you an idea as to kind of the consistency of effect that we have. But part of my work over the last 10 years has been trying to figure out how can I, number one, if a parent comes in and says, and I say, how can I help you? And they say, you know what, I've got 10 different concerns for my child. I need you to help me with all of them. One of them is picky eating. Another one is cooperation problems. Another one is not doing well in school, and so on and so forth. The question that I've had is, how can I get from meeting them to having them brag about me all around town as fast as possible with the least amount of effort? One thing I've tried to do was to figure out, of that list of 10 concerns, which one do we hit first? And if we hit that one first, it knocks out most of the rest without even touching those. You get my point, right? So we can call those, we can call that question, what are the meta factors? What are the keystone variables, if you will? And what I found, and I'm still trying to dial this in, I still need more data underneath this argument, but this is what the Boys Town Clinic that I founded is based upon, and that is that if sleep is a problem, we fix sleep first. And by the way, if the child is not medically healthy when they get to us, we're not doing anything until they see their pediatrician or a specialist and fix that. Once that's done, then we work on sleep if sleep is a problem. Once we work on sleep, then we target non-compliance directly. And behavior analysts in here know that you can certainly target non-compliance directly. Most mental health folks don't know that that's something that you can address directly, okay? But we do that. We teach skills. Parents, for example, say, like when you say, how can I help you? And the parent might say, well, I don't like that my child doesn't listen to me. Okay, so I can write that down, doesn't listen. But what's the positive opposite of that? What do you want to see? Well, I want to see the child follow directions. Okay, well, let's teach that skill. That's all. But anyway, I don't want to work harder than I have to on teaching that skill. So we fix sleep first. So anyway, that's what this is about, is that when we fix sleep first, compliance all by itself, I haven't even touched that yet. That pops. We get some lift in compliance rate by just simply targeting sleep. That's kind of a neat little finding. Okay? Now, before we go on, does anybody have any questions to this point or any observations, any thoughts? I kind of wish that I could have a dialogue with the folks online, too. I don't think we can do that here. Yeah. All right, so, okay, anything? No? Helpful so far? Good. All right. Common sleep disorder. So we've got problems initiating sleep. That's up to 30% of children. Over a third of adolescents, they have a problem initiating sleep, falling asleep readily. We see a higher incidence of this in developmental disabilities. And by the way, the most common reason for insomnia in childhood is fears and anxieties. And so, you know, they're afraid to be alone. They're afraid to be in the dark. What do we know in this room? I'll take a chance here. What do we know? Because I know I'm talking to professionals. What do we know is helpful in getting kids over fears and anxieties? Okay, but what gives them that? Mm-hmm. That's true. That's all true. But I want to go even deeper than that. If I have a fear of bridges, and I come to you as a patient, and I say, I need to get over a fear of bridges, what are you likely to recommend? That's it. Exposure. That's right. Graduated or complete exposure. Just, you got to go over the bridge. You know, even if I drive you over it, right? And then, you know, I'm from the Mid-Atlantic area, and I visit every now and then back to Delaware and Maryland. And you know what's funny? Is anybody here from that area? No? Do you know what the Bay Bridge is? The Chesapeake Bay Bridge? That's like, I can't remember how long it is, but it's miles. And it's really high off the water. And I'm not afraid of bridges. But having said that, I've noticed in my adult life, it never happened when I was in my teens, going back and forth to Baltimore. But I kind of like white knuckle it going up. Once I'm coming back down, I'm okay, but I kind of feel that way too. I'm a psychologist. That's not supposed to happen to me. But this is the story. This is funny. Over the past 5 or 6 years, there has been a business, maybe more than one now, that does nothing but you call them on their app, and they'll come and get in your car and drive you over it. And they have another car following, and then they let you go on the other side of it. They get in the car and go back. They're making a mint. Right? They don't want us to fix that, do they? Yeah. They don't want us to fix. Yeah. Well, you're talking about Pontchartrain.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I had to do that in the fog a bunch of times.
Did you take the smaller bridge going over too? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I know that area. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I remember that too. Wow. Anyway, so most common reason for insomnia in early childhood is anxieties and fears. Now, you know what? Behavior analysts in the room, or those of you who aren't but are interested, the fact that you're here is fantastic. So you're learning that there are direct ways of intervening and doing so very efficiently when it comes to these things. We need to get kids over the fear of being alone, number one, and being alone in the dark, number two. That is a prerequisite treatment step for us in our clinic, if that's one of the reasons, the function of behavior, if you will, for curtain calls when you say goodnight and then here they come for something. I forgot to tell you something. So we fix that first, and then we work on, bless you, and then we work on bedtime habits and all of that. Problems maintaining sleep. So there are some kids who go to bed just fine, but then they wake up almost reliably around 2 to 3, bless you, 2 to 3 in the morning, and they go to mom and dad's room, or they stay in their room, turn on the light, and play. Behavioral insomnia of childhood is not diagnosed anymore, but I'm still using that because it captures it beautifully. And this has to do with problematic sleep onset associations, the stimulus control stuff. And then micro sleeps. Those aren't absence seizures, by the way, petit mal seizures. Those are just the need to sleep. It's almost like little bouts of narcolepsy. Okay, now bedtime refusal and stalling, like stalling for bedtime, are a normal part of childhood development. When you think about it, it's intelligent behavior on the part of a child to figure out how I can postpone this. It was pointed out to me in training that most kids see bedtime as an unearned timeout. I didn't do anything to be put in here. What the hell? and then they fight that. When parents are inconsistent with bedtime expectations and reactions, this creates an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. Isn't that true? Right? Which is the hardest reinforcement schedule to extinguish. That is the slot machine schedule, right? Okay. I like to say that casinos know Skinner's work well. All right. Now, insomnia. What are some factors contributing to this? Now, for the professionals in the room, what I'm doing here is I'm giving you some thoughts in terms of your initial interview. Or your questionnaires. You're asking all of these questions. I said earlier today, I don't want to make this point again because it bears repeating, we're kind of still in the Stone Ages in our culture, in our society when it comes to the helping professions, because physicians do this, but they don't do that. Mental health people do this, but not that. Speech and language people do this over here, but none of that, and so on, right? What I suggest when I train fellow doctors, boy, I'm starting to train third-year medical students now. It's pretty cool in the pediatric office. It's awesome to catch them right there because I start talking about behavior analysis and behavior change, and the doctors work on nouns, but we work on verbs. We talk like that, and they're fascinated by that. What?
I'm sure sleep is an issue with them.
You know what? Yeah, right. Yeah, they just that's in the syllabus. You'll get no sleep for the next 5 years, But these are the things that I think that behavior analysts, mental health folks need to be asking. You need to be thinking about this as if you are a physician. Does that make sense? Like, don't miss it because it's so important. It's going to make you more effective. If you find that any of these light up with a particular family, then get a release signed so that you can reach out to a particular specialist. Maybe refer out for something. If there's another piece of advice I should share with everybody here is the pediatrician should be seen as the hub of care. And so always know who the pediatrician is with a child you're working with, and always go back to that pediatrician with a letter, a phone call, something, maintaining HIPAA requirements and all. But you want to work as a team because you do that. And by the way, the pediatrician needs to be seen as the captain of that ship. Need to. And if you treat a pediatrician like that once or twice, they'll refer to only you because they don't get that often. Anyway, so insomnia here. And for those who might not be able to see the wording here online, I'll read it to you. It's teething, reflux, ear infections with really young kids. We're talking about maybe diaper rash, food allergies, stomach discomfort, night feeding after 6 months of age. Up to then, we expect that they need something at night. After 6 months of age, as long as the child is healthy, does not need that. Electronics use, caffeine. Sometimes I find when I'm meeting with a family with sleep issues, I go through my questions. And you know what? There are sources of caffeine in the diet. And they go, oh, like it's not much, but it might be just enough to cause problems. Chocolate chip cookies, that kind of thing. My philosophy of practice involves, among other things, identifying and isolating variables that I can control and then optimizing the hell out of it. And so, well, there's not that much caffeine in a chocolate chip. You're right. But let's remove that as a potential confound. Eczema. Yes, ma'am.
Is it all chocolate or just chocolate chips?
All chocolate.
Because I heard that dark chocolate is good for kids.
Only in the morning, which is when you're least likely to give it to them. But you know what, though? I wouldn't say give them chocolate. I'd say that the chocolate might not be bad. I don't know about good, right? But who knows? I'm just saying, right now, all I'm saying, I'm not a nutritionist, right? Maybe we should talk to a nutritionist about that. I'm curious to see what they would say. But I'm just saying that if it's a potential contributor, let's remove it. At least for a while. Okay? Yeah, you bet. Asthma, breathing problems, chronic pain, JRA, seizure disorders, diabetes. No set rules for when it's okay to go to mom and dad's room. Children mild on the spectrum as well as those without ASDs. Long as there's sufficient language, you can give them a rule. And the rule is if there's a loud thunderstorm outside or if we're under hurricane threat, you can jump in bed. That's okay. But aside from that, don't come to my room. And naps after age 3. All right. Caffeine. And by the way, that's something else too for everybody in the room if you work with kids and families. It's interesting to find that when there is anxiety in the parent and in the child, you know what negative reinforcement is, right? Negative reinforcement is, the way I like to say it to families is it's reward in the form of relief. Negative reinforcement is relief as reward. Sleep problems in the child are most likely a function of negative reinforcement in the parent. In other words, they feel better by not pushing this. And so what's happening? Child's getting to bed too late. Child is sleeping in bed with mom and dad. It's easier. I don't feel like a bad mom or dad by not pushing this. But you know what? Something happens when the child is staying in bed with you, and that is they kick and wake you up. you get up out of bed in the middle of the night and wake them up, the marriage suffers as well in a lot of ways. There's no alone time. That's important. So I'm saying that if you can help clean that up for a family, they'll love you forever because they get back their life. Parents can't be only parents. They need to be husband and wife. They need to be their own person as well. Can't just be a parent. All right. Caffeine, we talked about adenosine before. I want to say that this works, like I said, like a sand timer. And so as adenosine builds, as you're awake, the more you're awake, the longer you're awake, the more adenosine is in your system, the more sleep pressure you feel. Okay, it just gets more and more difficult to stay awake. Caffeine uses the very same, it's attracted to the very same receptor sites. And so what's interesting is that caffeine beats the adenosine to those sites and blocks the adenosine from being taken, or binding to those. And so what that means is that when you've got caffeine in your system, your sleep debt or your sleep pressure could be really high, but the caffeine is blocking that signal. That's how that works. And so the more sleep pressure you have, in other words, you're trying to stay up 2 days for some reason, right? You didn't sleep all night because you had a project due or you were traveling or something's going on, childbirth, some kinds of stuff. Then the sleep pressure builds. You've been on caffeine for a while to not feel sleepy. And then when that finally metabolizes fully, then adenosine binds like crazy. And that's where crashes come from. Okay? Caffeine can remain active in your system for up to 14 hours. Did you know that? 14 hours. Depends on metabolism rate, and it also depends on age. So the older you are, the more likely you are to metabolize that more slowly. And some people just on the basis of genetics. And we actually know how that works. I don't have that for you here today. But if you metabolize it fast, well then you could have a cup of coffee at dinner and still be able to fall asleep pretty quickly. Other people, they're up all night long because of that coffee at dinner. Something else I like to point out too is that decaf is not decaffeinated, it's less caffeine. Okay, keep that in mind. We're thinking about, in this conversation, not only about ourselves, but we're also talking about our teenage kids and clients. I drink tea all the time, but it's decaffeinated. Okay, well, hold on. It's 1 cup of coffee, for example, 1 mug, which, by the way, is usually about 2 cups. 1 mug is about 400 milligrams, like 300 to 450. 4 cups of decaf could equal 1 cup of coffee. Okay, so that's powerful. I don't know why I'm not sleeping tonight. I only had decaf. All right. Let's talk about disrupted and non-restorative sleep. How's everybody doing, by the way? We good? Right around this time, I have to check in, make sure. Oh, and I said this earlier. It's the old joke about sleep talks. Is that if you're feeling like a little tired, like you could doze off, you're allowed. I'll take it as an honor, right? Because I want you to sleep. Everybody looks like they're doing okay, so that's good. For apnea, there are certain things that disrupt sleep, and one of those is sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is, frequent loud snore. By the way, I heard this from a sleep specialist, an honest-to-goodness sleep specialist, who said, kids don't snore. Kids don't snore. So if they do, then we need to look at that. Frequent loud snore, and by the way, if they're overweight, they're more likely to snore. But they still shouldn't be snoring. So frequent loud snoring, breathing pauses, gasping for air, unusual sleep posture geared to keep the upper airway open, their chin is high on the pillow, sweating at night, dry mouth, sore throat, headache in the morning, daytime sleepiness, hyperactivity, and or learning problems. That will not be an or, it will be an and. This is about 1 to 4% of children. I like to say this too. helping professionals have a restricted sample. That's 1%, 1 to 4% of the population of children. But we don't see all the children. We see the children with concerns, or at least the parents have concerns, which means that these kinds of percentages are probably higher for us. So we'll probably see maybe 10% of our population. So you always want to ask about that. Good? All right. Now, some other things here to consider as far as disruptive and non-restorative sleep. And when I say non-restorative, what we're getting at there is that kids are getting enough sleep. You take the sleep history as part of your overall intake. The parents say, well, child is 10 years old, and you say that he needs 10 hours of sleep. Well, he's getting 10 hours of sleep. In fact, he's in bed for 10 and a half hours of sleep. He's still having problems in school, and he naps in the car. What's going on? Well, it could be non-restorative. It could be disrupted. He's in bed long enough, but it might not be solid sleep. So there could be periodic limb movements. This is only diagnosable by a sleep study, by the way. Movements essentially disrupt sleep, as if somebody kicked you, right? They're kind of waking themselves up. Restless leg syndrome. This is up to 6% of kids and adolescents. We can think about this, and like I said, it's probably a little higher for our restricted samples that we see. Restless leg usually co-occurs with periodic leg movements, and it's associated with ADHD. So if a child comes in with ADHD symptoms, not diagnosed, or if you're diagnosing it, if it's certainly diagnosable, well then you're likely to see more of these kinds of things, like restless leg and periodic limb movements. I said earlier today also that it's these little things that I love as a clinician. I love picking up these little tidbits, and that one of these tidbits that I'm talking about is that these kids tend to be picky eaters. Now, what would picky eating have to do with poor sleep? Well, it turns out it's low iron, right? Exactly. So if they're picky eaters, it's not because they're not eating Snickers bars. It's because they're not eating meat, and they're not eating good greens, like broccoli and Brussels sprouts, those kinds of things. If they're low in iron, they're going to be at risk for these kinds of problems. You could send them back to the pediatrician to actually do a test to see, like a nutritional panel, to see whether or not serum ferritin, it's called, is low. Or you could just ask the pediatrician. Again, I'm always thinking conservatively here. Maybe we should talk to the pediatrician, but would it be okay, given this, your whole patient, would it be okay if I suggest that they use an iron supplement? And then almost always they'll say, yeah, sure. Okay. Sometimes pediatrician doesn't know where we're going with this. Okay. So then you give them the iron supplement, and that goes away. Guess what? It was low iron. We solved the problem. And if it doesn't solve the problem, we've ruled that out as a confound. We know that's not it. Restless leg syndrome, the way you ask that of a child, and by the way, the sleep medicine literature says that when a child is about 8 years old and older, you should really ask them directly about their own sleep if there's adequate language there. Because kids 8 or older are much more attuned to their own sleep than their parents are about their sleep. So you can ask them, do you ever feel like your legs just have to move, like they ache, but then when you move them, they feel better? And they'll go, yeah, that's a weird question. Or they'll say, oh, totally. And then you know that that's a hit, that's a red flag. Sleep seizures, and this is also called nocturnal epilepsy. This is most often in stage 1 and 2, not usually in REM. And sleep deprivation, by the way, is the most common trigger for seizures in all cases of, in cases of epilepsy. If you have epilepsy, you need good sleep, because if you're not getting enough sleep, more seizures are going to be triggered.
Stressful. Very stressful.
What's that?
For somebody to have seizures that can be triggered by non-sleep, sleep can trigger, that's stressful.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Imagine one kind of things together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you add on top of that parents who have learned by life, or maybe they're just wired that way, they run a little anxious, right? Again, negative reinforcement is the contributor there functionally. But I wonder how many cases of this go unnoticed because the kid's sleeping alone and not with the parents. You know, another reason for a sleep study perhaps, if we suspect it.
But the sleep study wouldn't necessarily identify that.
Unless it happens during the sleep study.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of times we send kids, or pediatrician sends kids to neurology for an EEG study, assuming that there might be, and if the EEG doesn't pick anything up, well then they say, well, there was no epileptiform activity, so I guess there's no seizures. But you know, that's what parents walk away with, is like, no, it was fine, but no, it wasn't picked up during the study. So that's one of the problems. In other words, a negative study, a negative meaning we didn't find seizures, really is worthless. It's hard to get around that, you know, because you can't rule things out by that. Anyway, let's talk about hypersomnia real fast. Hypersomnia is the need for more sleep than typical. Keep in mind that all of this that we're talking about as far as sleep occurs within a particular context, and that context, writ large, if you will, is modern life. We've got schedules to keep. We got to get out the door in the morning. The child's sibling has to get to band practice, or you know, has scouts or dance or something. So you know, we got to get moving. Narcolepsy is one of those things we see as a hypersomnia disorder. Cataplexy, or the loss of muscle tone during peak emotions, is a sign. This isn't a whole lot of people, but you know, it's 100% of each person that this affects, and that is that when they're really, really mad or they're really, really happy, they're prone at those moments to just fall asleep. And to lose muscle tone and fall to the floor, or just fall asleep in the chair. Micro sleeps during the day, which is just, you know, it kind of looks like absence, but they're asleep, but only for a minute or two. It's like a tiny little power nap. Sleep paralysis is interesting. When there's poor sleep, and a child needs more sleep than they're getting, they could wake up in the morning and not be able to move. And it freaks them out. And it makes them not want to go to bed tonight because they don't want that to happen again. But what's interesting about this is that what we know helps with these things is just enough sleep. Hypnagogic hallucinations. This is a phenomenon that occurs between being awake and falling asleep, right in there, or maybe going from sleep to wakefulness. It's in that little twilight little moment there where you get stuck in REM, but you're awake, which means that you're seeing some weird stuff. You're experiencing it as though it's actually existing. I said earlier, that's where I think all UFO abductions happen, right there. And treatment usually involves psychostimulants for hypersomnia. 1 to 2 short scheduled naps per day, consistent bed and wake times, and also you could have an accommodation written into the IEP, or if there's no IEP, you can get a 504 plan to basically say this kid needs a couple naps per day. They're going to be asleep anyway, so we might as well build it into their day. All right. You also have delayed and advanced sleep phase disorder. Delayed sleep phase is what we hear about the most. Advanced sleep phase, we really don't hear a lot about. But delayed sleep phase, it's seen in up to 16% of young adults and correlated with depression, academic failure, and substance abuse. So if a child is, and 16% is a lot. And like I said, our restricted samples that come to us for help, all of these are probably higher. That percentage is probably higher coming to us. In any event, delayed sleep phase, what that does is that if you have to go to bed at 10 o'clock in order to get enough sleep for the morning, what time you have to wake up, every night that goes by, your sleep pressure isn't high enough at bedtime, if that makes sense. So you're not sleepy. And so instead of 10 o'clock, then it goes to 10:15. The next night it goes to 10:30 as like when I'm ready. And it's just there. You're always like, bedtime's too early. I can't go to bed. I can't go to sleep that fast. And so there are ways of helping with this, but we have to identify it first to know that we need to treat it. These kids usually get to us not because of sleep, but because of the problems in school or those kinds of things, all this other stuff. That's why we have to ask about sleep. Okay, non-REM parasomnias, we now call those disorders of arousal. That sounds to me like a different kind of disorder. But sleep terrors here, up to 7% of children up to age 12. Sleep terrors, by the way, they seem like they are nightmares. They are not nightmares. A nightmare is a dream you don't like. And 90% of dreams happen in REM stage. Sleep terrors happen in deep sleep. I can also tell you that you heard me say a little bit earlier that REM stage sleep, your mind is active, but the switch is flipped and you are paralyzed. You can't move. You are at the most relaxed your body will be in 24 hours, in the 24-hour cycle, when you're in REM stage. So when we're talking about parasomnias, when we're talking about sleepwalking, sleep talking, sleep peeing, by the way, like sleep enuresis, that's something. That happens. If you're trying to work on potty training and everything's working well, and then all of a sudden the kid for 3 nights in a row pees the bed, it could be sleep enuresis. It's interesting. Usually when they get enough sleep, that goes away too. But anyway, sleep terrors. You know what a sleep terror is? It's when a child wakes up in the middle of the night and it's like a horror movie scream, right? That makes the parents jump out of bed and run in there. If they're armed, they have it with them. like what in the world is going on here? Like my child is not safe. And they walk in and there's nothing wrong, but the child is eyes are awake even. I mean, it looks like they're awake, but it turns out that, and it's not a dream. It's not a dream in a sense that they're not in REM stage. So all we need to do, and especially if it happens in the first third of the night, why would that be? Because it's deep sleep. Remember I told you deep sleep is in the beginning of the night. So what we do for sleep terrors is just to tell parents, don't wake them up. It's only terrifying to you, not to the child. The child will not remember it. We don't know where they come from. But with better and more consistent sleep patterns, those go away. Or at least they get better. Confusional arousals, that's up to 45 minutes at a time. They could be 5 minutes at a time, but that's when you say goodnight to your son or daughter, or your clients say goodnight to their kids. And then probably about half hour to an hour and a half or 2 hours later, they come out of their room and they're just kind of sleepwalking and they talk to you about something nonsensical, and all you have to do, and this happens, we see that in my daughter sometimes, is that we just have to just walk her back to bed. We don't say anything. But here you go, come on, that's all we say. We take her back to bed. She's grown out of that lately. She's 10. Anyway, sleepwalk, and by the way, up to 40% of children from age 2 on. That's a lot. That's a lot. Sleepwalking, up to 40% of kids. Sleep talking, sleep enuresis, up to about 10% of 6-year-olds. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay. I don't even know what time it is. 2:25. Okay, we're going till 4. We're good. All right, let's talk about assessment. I love this picture. Got some giggles this morning on this. Some signs of poor sleep. One would be that parents must wake the child rather than the child getting up on his or her own, and unable to get going within 15 minutes. They're still in bed saying, get out. 2+ hours or more sleep on weekends. In other words, Saturday morning, let them sleep in. They're sleeping until noon. That's a sign that they need more sleep every day. Car napping. or he's a different person with more sleep. And also, bed sheets are a mess. We say bed sheets are a mess because that could be signs of periodic limb movement or restless leg. Okay? Or just not sleeping in the middle of the night. They're just all around. Now let's talk about non-sleep study assessment. So this is what we can all do in here as professionals. First thing we want to do is we want to, if we suspect that there are sleep problems, we can ask the parents to keep a sleep diary for a week or two, because that's like, for most of us, we know what an ABC recording is, and it's kind of the same thing. But we just want data. We don't want to just rely on the parents' recollection. We want to know what the bedtime was at night, what time they think the child was asleep. By the way, don't just ask what time is bedtime. Ask what time are they asleep too. Okay, because with those two pieces of data, you get all kinds of information. How long does it take to fall asleep? If there's a 90-minute difference between bedtime and falling asleep, you can ask, well, why is that? And parents either go, he just lays there and he just can't fall asleep. Or they say, I can't get him to bed. So that's two different interventions. Any night waking? Do they wake up in the middle of the night? Where do they go when they wake up? How do you know they're awake? That's a good question. How do you know they're awake? How long were they up at night? How much sleep did they lose? Because see, you're getting ready to do a calculation here, how much sleep they're getting per night. And naps as well. And how long those naps are. I didn't say this earlier. I want to say this. Just want to make sure I say this. We see naps as a function of brain maturation from birth to about age 3. I think about 20% of kids at age 4 are still napping during the day. But then after that, very few kids are napping naturally. So if you've got a 7-year-old, or if you've got a 12-year-old, for example, and they're taking naps every day, that's a problem of sleep consolidation. We want to consolidate that sleep only overnight. And the only way to get that done is to take away the naps. But assessing first, you get all this information so you can see what's going on. An ABC of daytime. Now we're talking about sleep assessment here, but why would we care about what happens during the day? Well, geez, good sleep health, especially getting kids to go to bed on their own, reasonably independently, reliably, and falling asleep fast, staying asleep all night long, waking up rested and ready for the day. That requires good behavior generally. That requires high compliance rate. That requires a child to say, okay, Mom, or at least not thwart that. So ABC of daytime is a really good thing. Antecedent behavior consequence. Just a diary. Doesn't have to be ABC, but it could be ABC if you're talking about problem behavior during the day. A good questionnaire or interview would look at things like timing and consistency. Oh, you know what? You know what really is a monkey wrench in the works with sleep is when you've got a divorced couple and they have 2 different houses and the child is going back and forth. Because almost always I see that mom's on top of this and dad is fun dad. Sometimes vice versa, right? But dad lets them stay up all night long. He's got buddies over, that kind of thing, where everybody's up till midnight. Child's watching, crazy movies. But anyway, bedtime routine, bedtime refusal, fears. Because keep in mind, if there are fears and anxieties about bedtime or being alone, then that's going to hurt bedtime and sleep onset. Another way to say this before I go through this is when you're collecting initial information from a family, you're looking for any and all intervention points. You're looking for ways of helping. You're looking for what I need to do. By next session, what am I going to recommend? That's why you're collecting all this stuff. Light use. Does your child use a nightlight? What would happen if you remove the nightlight tonight without any ritual about it? Just take it out. What would happen? Oh, he'd freak. So we've got some negative reinforcement in place with mom. Always look at that too. Always look at maintaining variables in terms of the behavior of the parents, because keep in mind, they're coming to you for help, and you have to do a behavior analysis of their behavior too, because you care about them and you want to help them out. You have to understand what's fueling their own choices, their own behavior, as it relates to bedtime. Yes, ma'am.
It is my belief that the child gets anxiety.
Yes.
He is fearful.
Yeah.
And he has all these other little things.
How old is he, by the way?
Due to the parents.
Okay. Are we talking about a particular, or are you talking about a person? Like an individual?
Any child.
Any child. Okay, thank you. Okay. In other words, the parent could be more anxious.
Yeah.
And that could be, the child could be,
Yeah.
I agree.
But how do you fix the parent?
How do you fix a parent? By talking to the, if I know, see, if the child is my client, right, not the parent. If the child is my client, and I know that by helping the parent be less anxious, whether they tell me that or not, if I pick that up, I'm going to suggest that as part of our overall treatment plan. That will be part of my sequencing, because whatever I recommend to the parent, I want the parent to do. And if the parent is too avoidant, too anxious, too nervous about doing something, well then our work is going to be worthless, because nothing's going to be put in place, right? So I see that not in terms of just, I need to treat mom too. I don't think about it that way. I'm engineering everything we're doing for treatment adherence and success. So I want the parent to be able to do what I say to do. So if anxiety is going to be getting in the way of success, I want to remove that set of variables. You see that? I want to help with that. And so that's how I look at that. Good? Yeah, but you're right though. You're right. Is that parental anxiety, and by the way, I'm not saying parents are doing it wrong. When I say that parent anxiety, hear me out on this. I know that parent anxiety is one of the reasons why we have some problems that we see that they're bringing to us, but that's not their fault. They're shaped by their child's behavior just as much as their child is shaped by their behavior. It's an interaction, and our job is to not talk about how we got here as much as what do we do now to solve the problems that you're here for. Does that make sense? Good. You'll also ask about whether or not there are curtain calls. And again, that's our way of saying that you say goodnight and then here comes the child asking for something. Sweating at night, covering's a mess, night terrors, caffeine use, tummy aches, snoring, apnea, diary of physical activity. That's important. Like in other words, when you look at the diary of the day, like just the way I was trained is to, when you're talking to a parent for the first time, you want to go around the clock and you just want to ask, just what does it look like? If I hung out for a day, what would I see? What would I observe? What's going on? What's the flow of the day? John Bailey, some of us know John Bailey, Dr. Bailey. He's in behavior analysis at Florida State. One of his biggest sayings is, you just got to see it. You just got to see it. So if you're not going to go to the house, the next best thing is a whole lot of information they share with you. So you want to get it. So diary of physical activity, do not exercise within 4 and 6 of bed. 4 and 6 hours. Sorry about that. What did I just type there? And we want the body to cool by then. That's something else. Keep in mind when I was talking about the Zeitgebers of where the sun is in the sky, and the fact that when the sun is coming down in the sky, it's starting to become nighttime. It gets dimmer and it gets cooler. Well, keep in mind that anything you do that raises your core body temperature is sending the wrong signal. So working out right before bed, rough housing around the house with siblings or with the dog. What else? Hot shower or bath. That is thwarting the natural Zeitgebers. That is not helping. I'm not saying that a child cannot have a bath before bed or a shower before bed, but what I am saying is that it can't be a long, luxurious one, and it can't steam up the mirror or the windows. because you're raising their core body temperature. That's sending the wrong signal. We want the body to be cooling. Okay, does that make sense? Boy, that's a big pickup. I forgot to say that earlier. Everybody's giving their kids like long, because they're not sleeping well, they think, well, a long hot bath will help you. Well, you're nice and relaxed, but you're wired. You can't fall asleep. Contents of the bedroom. Sometimes kids, when they wake up in the middle of the night, instead of falling back asleep, they get up and they play with what's in their room. Once again, I like to say that we want to optimize every variable we can to get the job done. We can loosen up later. So what I say is, put it this way. In cases where the child has gotten up at least once and played with Legos in the middle of the night, then I say that I don't want to do anything until you clean everything out of that room except for the mattress. Okay? Because I want that room to be nothing but where the child sleeps, nothing else. And when the child wakes up in the middle of the night, I don't want them to do anything. There's nothing to do. I want them to wake up and go, I guess there's nothing to do, and then fall back asleep. I want that to be more likely. Examine how consistent the entire day's routines are, especially across households in cases of divorce and with visitation schedule in mind. Kids older than 7 tend to know much about their own sleep. So I said, yeah, 8 or older. Okay. Now, sleep requirements. No naps after age 4 typically, and then from age 1 to age 17, this is what is typically required, recommended. This is based on Richard Ferber, 2005, I think, if you want to know where I got this. Ferber, 2005, I think. Or 2006, I can't remember which one of those. The way I teach this, it's good to have a heuristic in your mind as you're working with parents. Think about, you see age 4 and age 17, do you see how that ranges from 11 to 9? Right? Well, I hinge it all in my mind on 10. So 10 hours, if you're 10 years old, you need 10 hours. That's easy to remember. But then 4 and 17 are the anchors of that continuum, right? And that's just one more hour each way. So 4 needs 11 hours, 17 needs 9. And so what does a 14-year-old need? 9.5, exactly. So it's easy to remember that. By the way, no one knows this. No one knows this. Parents aren't given this by their pediatrician when they have a baby or at well checks. They need to. Okay? No one knows this. And so just sharing this information with parents when you meet with them, I try to let teachers I work with in various ways, I like to let them know, because if a child is having problems in the classroom, then the teacher, in my mind, is a primary care practitioner. The teacher can say, Mom and Dad, how much sleep is your child getting? And if they say, I don't know, like us, about maybe 8 hours, and we're talking about a 4-year-old or a 6-year-old, the teacher can say, well, you know what? Here are the guidelines I got from a doctor or a behavior analyst, and this is what your child needs. And they go, oh, wow. And then they make some changes, and then the child does better in school. Okay. Any questions right now? We good? Is this helpful? Good. I'm so glad you guys are here. I said earlier, you guys could have gone to the beach today. You're here. All right. Behavioral treatment, proactive guidance with infants. And by the way, this is entirely relevant for the entire age range of children to know what the anticipatory guidance is for infant sleep. It's important because there are some principles that are tucked in there. One of them is, put them down drowsy and not asleep. Do not nurse them until they're asleep and then tiptoe to the crib and put them down and tiptoe away. Because guess what happens when they wake up and you're not there? They notice there's a change in their sleeping environment from when they fell asleep, and that's frightening. Okay? What if you fell asleep in your bedroom tonight, woke up 2 hours later, and you woke up in a completely different room than you thought you fell asleep in. Would that freak you out or what? Like you wouldn't know what to do with that. But that's what happens with them when they fall asleep on the couch with mom and dad watching a TV show. And then they wake up a couple hours later in bed with no one around. TV isn't on. Guess what they're looking for? They're looking for mom and dad, sofa, and TV to fall back asleep. Stimulus control. When you think about it, it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, is that when we used to, for thousands and thousands of years, just roam in tribes, right? We didn't have houses to live in and lock the door at night and those kinds of things. When you would fall asleep with, maybe your family, your tribe around you, maybe some things that you are bringing along with you, and then you wake up an hour or two later, and you just wake up just long enough to look around and see if everything's the same. And if it is, then you can fall back asleep, you feel good. But if you wake up and things have changed, then you go into fight or flight response because you've got problems, you've got trouble. Make sense? All right. We're mammals after all. Something to keep in mind. So I like to say that our DNA hasn't caught up to the fact that the sun isn't the only light source anymore, or that we have locks and alarms on our houses. Our DNA doesn't know that. So, consistent schedule. Oh, and I'm sorry, back at the top there, put down drowsy and not asleep, and after 6 months of age, after changing and feeding, allow them to cry without rescuing them. Why? Because that helps with self-calming. We call it self-quieting, self-calming. And when they fall asleep, even after that tantrum, and then they wake up in the same environment they fell asleep in, and you do that for night after night after night, week after week, it becomes predictable. And now they fall asleep readily, and when they wake up, they fall right back asleep. Do you remember the sleep architecture I showed you earlier? Okay. Every time you go from wakefulness down to stage 4, up again, or from stage 1 down, up again, REM, and then down again, each one of those cycles is about 75 minutes long. You are most likely to wake up in the middle of the night after a sleep cycle during REM. That's why you remember dreams, because you woke up out of them. You don't remember dreams that you do not wake up out of. That's interesting. No one knows that, but that's it's like we all experience it. And here's my point, is that in a typical 7-hour night for all of us, 7 or 8 hour night, we might wake up about 2 or 3 times a night. Just long enough to ask ourselves 2 questions. Am I comfortable, or do I need to flip over? And do I need to pee? No? Okay, and then you fall back asleep. It's that moment. It's at the end of a sleep cycle, okay? And that's what's happening with kids, is that kids, they get done with a sleep cycle, they wake up, and they look around just enough. So they're asking themselves 3 questions. 1, am I comfortable? Number 2, do I need to pee? And number 3, where's mom? And so they're like, what? Something was here before that isn't there now. And so I need to fix that before I can fall back asleep. So anyway, so consistent schedule and routine, even on weekends, no co-sleeping. People ask me sometimes when I give general talks, if I don't mention it in the talk, they might ask at the end, is it okay that, what do you think about the family bed? That kind of thing, the family bed idea, that everybody sleeps on top of each other like puppies. And I say, generally speaking, I don't think it's evil. I don't, as long as everybody's getting enough sleep and everybody's okay and well behaved, doing well in school, good for you. That's okay. But if they come to me for help clinically, and there's all kinds of red flags as far as, problems with functioning, then I say, it's probably not the best idea. It's not helping us. Maybe we could clean that up, clean up the rest, fix everything as much as we can, and then after about a year, maybe you can go back to family bed, But you can do that contingently upon having a great school week, for example, and then we can all hang out together on Saturday night, that kind of thing. Just a way to do it. After age 4, no naps and no sleeping in. How many people have that rule in their house with their preteens or their teenagers? No sleeping in, right? And you see that causes some problems. And by the way, most of these families, they don't even seek help. They don't come to us. Get some sun during the day and mimic caveman days, like I say. In the evening regarding light and temperature, do not use a night light. I really like kids to be able to fall asleep, especially if we're trying to solve problems. I want them to fall asleep in darkness. By the way, something else about the fear of the dark. Before we're done, I'm going to show you some things we didn't get to earlier that are just like kind of one-offs. They're like little tips that you can share with families, and they work real well for little things like this. But this isn't coming up on a slide, so I'll tell you this. Kids don't know, this is an angle I kind of discovered recently to say it this way. Let's say I'm in my office with let's say a 5-year-old. 5-year-old's not going to bed independently because they're afraid of the dark. And I say, do you know that you have night vision? They're old enough to know what I'm talking about. Like, you can see in the dark. And they go, really? Yeah, you can see in the dark, but it's black and white. But your eyes won't know to turn that on until you're in the dark for 5 minutes. So once you're in the dark for 5 minutes, then your brain goes, I need to see in the dark. And so then all of a sudden you can see in the dark, but it's black and white. It's pretty cool. Have you ever tried it? No. Try it. In fact, what we do is we say go into a bathroom or someplace in the house without a window and try it. Mom or dad is there too. And let's try it. And they see that it works well, and then they're even less scared of the night because they know they at least need to hang out for 5 minutes in the dark. And usually that's all it takes to keep them there is 5 minutes. Okay? Something else too, especially with intellectually bright children. Hey, Jack. Intellectually bright children, kids who are in sports and they don't get home till 9:30 because they're on a travel baseball team or something like that. The high achievers academically, they sacrifice sleep to get everything else in. And again, if they're not coming to me, well then that's fine with me. As long as everything's okay, good for you, you can pull that off. But if there are problems, if they're coming to you because there are problems, once again, I'd like to suggest kind of how I approach cases, which is in order to solve problems, let's identify and isolate all variables that we can control and then optimize all of it. We can loosen up later, but let's do that now. And so in doing so, we need to have a really good sense of what our priorities are. What's most important on a list of sports? Sleep. What else? Homework, right? Yeah, what's more important? Family hangout time. What's most important? Keep in mind that you're having this conversation because sleep has been the lowest on that priority list. And so I say there's got to be a sense of priorities here so that you have a decision-making rule. And that decision rule is that sleep is more important than homework or sports. If you're not getting enough sleep, if your child is not getting enough sleep, and I have to say this gently to some people, usually the kids who are on the travel baseball teams, for example, who are not getting enough sleep, their dad is the coach. It's that kind of thing. So I'm not going to tell that dad, you need to take him out of sports because he's not getting enough sleep, because they're not going to listen anyway, right? One did. I was surprised at that. But it's not often. So I say, listen, maybe after this season, maybe we should revisit this. Maybe we should think, because maybe when you meet them, it's only another month of sports. And you say, let's look at this. Maybe we should really prioritize sleep. By the way, help the parents nail down a bedtime. And then whatever that bedtime is, let's say 9 o'clock for like a 12-year-old. or a 10-year-old. But I've got a lot of homework to do. Well, hon, that's too bad because you've got sleep now. We got to stay on schedule, and sleep is more important than homework. Okay, now high achievers are going to hate you for that, and the teacher is going to hate you for that because the teacher says I gave them this homework, I assigned it, I want it done. But sleep is more important. One way that helps is because a lot of ways. Real quick, I'll go through this and then we'll move on. When you nail down a bedtime, and you've got all these competing things going on, like homework and sports and all, understand that if you nail that bedtime down, well then the child will adjust. And somehow homework becomes more efficient. Somehow, right? If it's still not getting done, and especially depending upon whether, like the age of the child, if the age is maybe 3rd grade or more or older, you can actually ask the child, again, based upon language skills and those kinds of things, you can go to your teacher and say, gosh, I don't have enough time to get my homework done. Can you help me understand how to organize it better or something? I try to make homework something between the child and the teacher with very little to do with the parents. That cleans a lot up because homework ruins family life, and in some cases it doesn't have to. And that's one way to fix that pretty quickly, is to say, well, that's not your job, Mom, right? You don't have to do that. That's between the child and the teacher. And as it relates to bedtime, you know what? It's time for bed. If that is a predictable routine, well, then the child hopefully will grow up maintaining some sense of that priority for sleep in college and beyond, where they're less likely to stay up all night long and cram for a test. Instead, they'll know that they have to get enough sleep in order to focus on the test tomorrow, or next week, and so all through the week they're going to be studying for the test rather than waiting till last minute. A lot of things get fixed when you prioritize sleep. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? Good, okay. Sufficient iron as well, and of course we talked about that because of restless leg and others. Now, proactive guidance. Some more of this. The crib to bed transition. You guys want to know about this? We can skip this unless you're interested.
I'd like to know.
You'd like to know. Thank you so much. So what we're talking about here is this is how to go from a crib to the big boy bed or the big girl bed. First off, you celebrate the upcoming transition. Yay, you're growing up. All right. You place the crib next to the new bed. You warn that if this doesn't work, well then we'll use the crib again. And follow through with no more warnings. By the way, generally speaking, I don't like warnings. All that does is blunt the power of the consequence. So no warnings, just pull the trigger. And praise in the morning for success. Leave the crib there for a couple weeks as a reminder that you might go back to the little girl or little boy bed. Use the good morning light. Now the good morning light is kind of neat. Here's what that is. Think about the typical use of a night light. The night light comes on at night, it goes off when you get up. The good morning light is the opposite cycle. And the best way to do this is to get an old Christmas tree timer, like one of those little rotary timers, right? You put those pins in, right? And you plug in a night light. Best case scenario, you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy a colored light bulb, like a red or a green one or something, so it's different. And maybe green, because green means time to get up, okay? So what you do is it's off at night, and then when it's time to get out of bed, it comes on. And so that's what we're trying to do, is create some stimulus control there for the child. This is especially important for, again, we're talking about toddlers here, especially important for kids who at any age, depending upon their developmental level, are having a hard, they don't understand the clock yet. They don't understand time concepts. So you may need a video monitor, alarm system for when you're asleep, the child is asleep. And no available toys, because we don't want we don't want to make it more likely that they're going to get out of bed at night. And you can use like little doggy gates and those kinds of things to keep them in the room. Because keep in mind now, this is the first time in their lives that they've been expected to be alone for that long and not in the crib. And so what you're doing is you're kind of making the bedroom the crib by putting that gate on there. Any questions about that? This tends to work pretty well. If the child, the whole point of the video monitor and all that is to make sure that as a parent, if your child is getting out of the big boy or big girl bed, you go back to that, you go back to them pretty quickly and take them back to their bed, but not looking at them or talking to them. You're kind of robotically returning them to the big boy bed. You could, after 2 or 3 times of doing that, if they're just not accepting it, you can put them back in the crib and then leave. And then try again tomorrow night. Is that useful? By the way, this kind of advice for parents is gold. Okay. So now we're talking about general intervention strategies for problems with bedtime and falling asleep. Unmodified, or what we call complete extinction, that's in terms of sleep medicine. Complete extinction. This is the cry it out method. Some people call it. I don't call it that. You might have heard of it. This is the guideline recommendation, by the way, by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. You may begin this when the child turns 6 months of age, and 6 months of age corresponds with no longer needing to be fed at night. The standard treatment duration is 3 nights, and I love saying that to parents. We can get this done in 3 nights if you're ready. And we have to talk about the extinction burst phenomenon because we want them to know that in all likelihood, especially if the child is older, and this has been going on for a long time, the problem is going where bedtime is a mess, child is sleeping in bed with mom and dad, that kind of thing. It's gonna be bad the first couple nights, and the research on this, the typical extinction burst in terms of tantrums, crying, you don't love me, you're a terrible mom, all that stuff coming from the bedroom, usually lasts about 45 minutes on average the first night. Again, this is with full treatment adherence. Parents doing exactly what you say to do. First night about 45 minutes, the second night doubles. You got to tell them that, or else they're going, this doesn't work, and then they'll stop. You have to let them know what will happen so that they stay on track. Second night, usually about 90 minutes tantrum. Third night, again, full treatment adherence. The parents are pulling through. They're doing well. About 20 minutes. And then the fourth night is beautiful. Fourth night is magical. And on the 5th day, they brag about you all around town that you're a magician. Okay. By the way, parents who have not already done this naturally, they are either avoidant themselves. We talked about anxiety in parents a little earlier. They're avoidant or anxious themselves because maybe they have a high-stress job and they need their sleep, and so they're much more likely to just kind of put fires out rather than solve the problem. And that's okay, but that's why they're coming to you maybe, is to help them get past all of that kind of management style. But they also, when you really get down to it, they might admit to you something. They're afraid that they're going to do long-term damage to the mom-child bond. And I say, oh, you know what? We've got some great news about that. Bless you. Bless you. The research is in. We know that it doesn't do anything to the mom-child bond. In fact, it might actually help. There are no long-term negative consequences to this. And by the way, there's also been studies looking at maternal depression rates. And it turns out that by getting this under control, mom's doing a lot better. Her own mental health. Now, there are lots of different ways up this mountain. One way is complete extinction that we just talked about. That's about what we just talked about before, this unmodified or complete extinction method, 3 nights and out. That's used in my clinic, in my practice, probably, like in my daily practice, probably about 90 to 95% of all cases, and it works well. Sometimes it doesn't work well. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes when I tell parents about what we're going to do, they go, no, we're not going to do that. I can't do that. I can't imagine doing that. I can't stand to hear my kid cry. You know, it's that stuff. I have an important job. I can't not get my sleep. You know, so I get some of that from parents. And so I say, well, you know what? You're in luck because I've got a toolbox here of some other things that we could look at. So we don't have to use that. We could maybe go to some other tools. So instead of complete extinction, we also have graduated extinction. Now, graduated extinction, you may know as the Ferber method. And again, Richard Ferber is a sleep guy, among other things. And what he's done is he's come up with, he's written a lot about graduated extinction methods. This has less empirical support than the unmodified, the first thing I showed you, the complete extinction, but it's still got some support. Treatment duration, instead of 3 nights, 2 to 4 nights, somewhere in there. Treatment duration could be 2 to 3 weeks because it's graduated. It's taken longer. We're taking baby steps toward where we want to be. Now, there are 2 forms of this, according to a lot of the literature. One of them is with the parent present. When you say goodnight, the parent will be present. Another one is if the parent is not going to be present. So depending upon certain factors, you can choose which one you want to use. You could actually talk about the different options with the parent, and then they can decide, and you can say, okay, let's go down that road. If it doesn't work, we've got plan B and C. Jack, do you know which behavior analyst said? I was trying to remember this earlier. It's a famous quote in our literature about fading out. So you want to fade out like a thief in the night. Anytime you fade at all, you want to fade as fast as you can. I can't remember. I don't think it was Wolf, but I can't remember who it was. Probably someone online knows and they can't tell us. but anyway, whenever you're fading in some way, some procedure, you want to do that as fast as you can because there's no reason to prolong this if you don't need to. In this case, without parental presence, to me, seems like a more efficient way, and so that's where I start. Without, if I'm using graduated extinction, okay. Now, what this means is say goodnight and leave, okay. But you know from history, the parent knows from history that when you say goodnight and you try to leave, it's going to be about 3 minutes, not 1 or 2, but usually 3 minutes. I'm just making this up. 3 or 4 minutes that the child goes, Mom, or comes out, right? So what that means is that you're going to beat them to that. So instead of waiting 3 minutes, you're going to go 1.5 minutes and go back in and say, I'm just checking on you. Just want to see if you're okay. All right, you good? Okay, good night. Right? And then you leave. So you say good night and leave, but return on a set schedule, starting with a rich fixed and moving to a lean intermittent, moving from contingent to non-contingent attention. So instead of you say, so in layman's terms, instead of saying, essentially through your action, I'm only going to come in when you bother me enough. Now you're saying, you'll get me anyway, so you don't need to do that. Okay? You're just switching the contingency. Without parental presence. Brett Kuhn from the Omaha's Monroe Meyer Institute came up with something called the excuse me drill, which is basically similar. It's basically this, and that is you say, you're hanging out with your kid after you say goodnight, and then you say, oh, you know what, excuse me, I got to go check something, I'll be right back. Then you leave, and then you come back right before you think they're going to call for you, and you sit back down in the chair next to their bed. Now, you told them already, I'm not going to make eye contact or talk to you if you ask me a question, because after I say goodnight, we're done. Oh, you know what? I forgot I need to do something. I'll be right back. And you leave, and then you come back. So what you're doing is you're offering exposure to the feared stimulus, right? So what's the exposure? What exposure? They're alone. You're offering that in a graduated way. With parental presence, is that say goodnight and leave, but return. With parental presence that's the excuse me drill, where you're there, but then you leave, and then you come back. Okay? You could also, instead of that, you can move your chair each night further away from the bed. I'm just going to sit here. This is the second night. I'm going to sit about a foot away from the bed. Good night. And then you just sit there and check Facebook or something. And then the next night, the chair is a little bit further away. Next thing you know, like another couple nights, your chair is in the doorway. Good night. You're just sitting there. And then they fall asleep and then you're out, right? And then the next night, your chair is in the hallway with the door open, and you get the idea. So you're moving. And by the way, if you find with the fading technique or the procedure, if you find that they start freaking out because you're too far away, that means that you faded too fast. And so you know that the next night you have to go back a few steps and start again, and then go out more slowly. Yeah. Yep. At Southern Miss, we call that boiling a frog, right? All right. Bedtime fading. This is a new bedtime is when the child is sleepy, and if successful, fade it back another 15 minutes tomorrow night. Weekends are no different, and no sleeping in. So what we're trying to do there is if we have problems falling asleep, let's say that the intended bedtime is 8 o'clock at night, and the child is just not sleepy, just not falling asleep till probably about 9:30. Okay, so if we're going to do, and again, this is just another tool in the toolbox for sleep problems, is that you say, you know what, this could be pretty easy to do. This is actually good with the older kids, right? The extinction methods are really appropriate for younger kids. But for older kids, you could use bedtime fading. So you say, you know what, if bedtime is 8 o'clock, you guys follow me? 8 o'clock, and you're not sleepy till 9:30, well then, tell you what, let's make bedtime 10 o'clock. Kid goes, okay. That sounds great. Kid loves you for saying that. And then if the child falls asleep within 10 or 15 minutes of that bedtime, then guess what we do the night after? Is that we move it up just by 10 or 15 minutes, and then we keep moving it back until we get to 8 o'clock. Okay? So we're fading bedtime. Why no sleeping in? We need consistency, and also with the sleep pressure, we want to make sure that the sleep pressure is optimal for the next bedtime. Sleep restriction, that's for night waking. So when kids are waking up in the middle of the night, you can create more sleep pressure by waking them up early for the day. They hate you. But man, they can't wait to go to bed the next night, and they tend to sleep a little bit better throughout the night after you use the sleep restriction. In sleep medicine, for adults, sleep restriction is used an awful lot. Chronotherapy is pretty interesting as well. And this is for jet lag, if you've been traveling over the pond, as they say. Keeping them up later and later on successive nights until you achieve the desired sleep schedule. So in other words, what you're doing is bedtime is, like, let's say I want bedtime to be, let's say for me, let's say 10 o'clock. But I've been traveling, and my gosh, I'm not even sleepy till like 3 in the morning, right? So what we'll do is bedtime now will be 3 in the morning. And I'm going to, if you can pull this off schedule-wise, right? It's like I can just take 2 weeks off. But anyway, 2 more weeks off if I was traveling, right? Is to go from 3 in the morning and get 7 hours of sleep. Okay, 3 in the morning. The next night, bedtime is at 4, and I get 7 hours. The next night, bedtime is 5 o'clock, and I get 7 hours. See what we're doing? So we're going around the clock. We're going around the clock essentially to where bedtime now is 10 o'clock. Yeah. That's the nuclear. That's a nuclear option for sleep medicine. But sometimes, with lifelong, especially with adult sleep medicine, with medicine, not medication, but the topic, with lifelong sleep problems, that might be what's needed. All right. Talked about stimulus control therapy, classical conditioning for sleep onset, which is get out of bed if you can't sleep nowhere but bed, only sleep in bed, go to bed when sleepy, keep it all consistent, right? So bedtime means I'll be asleep soon. For dangerous behavior at night, gosh, you know that Simply Safe now? You see that's the alarm system that they have on TV that you can buy. You don't need to prescribe or subscribe. You don't need to subscribe to the alarm service, right? You could just buy the materials, like the basic kit, and then you can have it beep when they leave their room, and so you know. You could also put a little bell on top of the door, so that you know that if you're trying to get, like, if they're up in the middle of the night, if you're trying to fix that, but you're asleep and you don't know that they're up, it's not going to get fixed. And so we're trying to figure out a way to alert you to the fact that they left. Okay? Bright light therapy, that's really getting at the circadian rhythm, trying to reset the suprachiasmatic nucleus in a sense, or the circadian rhythm. When you wake up in the morning, you've got this light box that's kind of like, like noon, like sitting in the sun. Relaxation strategies as well helps with falling asleep and staying asleep. If you can't get back to sleep, you can use relaxation strategies like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness, those kinds of things, okay? Now, great first-line tips for parents. This is a great quote because this gets at whether or not you're going to be successful. And that is, these behavioral interventions are only as good as the family's willingness and ability to implement them. That's why when we were talking earlier, ma'am, we were talking about anxiety in parents. If there's anxiety in parents, we need to maybe look at that as something we need to directly affect in order to help the system become more effective in putting this in place. Now, not quite a year ago, I was given the opportunity to give a couple of talks to groups of pediatricians and some specialists. And what I wanted to do was give them a series of little bullet points. Like, these are things not only that you could suggest, but that I do if you send people my way, right? This is what I suggest to parents. And so with bedtime refusal, and also I'm thinking about this in terms of the autism population too, is that with bedtime refusal, you know what? Sometimes, depending upon language, depending upon developmental level, we could just need a picture schedule. We could just make it more predictable to them that this is what's next. Or a written schedule as well. We do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and then bed. Early waking and leaving bed, can't tell time, that's the good morning light we talked about. Fear of the dark. By the way, with the good morning light, Home Depot now and Lowe's, they have them right in aisle number 7 or whatever, right? They have these outlets that you can plug in to your electrical outlet, and it connects to your phone via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, depending on who makes it, like Wemo and others. Kind of like a smart home kind of application. And so you can set that and leave it. So it's not the pins, because the kid can pull the pins out. If you want to, if they're trying to thwart this, then you want to thwart them thwarting it. And so you can buy a Bluetooth panel, and that's kind of cool. They're a little bit more expensive, but it might solve the problem. Fear of the dark, flashlight and blindfold treasure hunts. That's pretty cool. So guess what we're trying to do there? We're trying to just, provide exposure. Yeah, it's all good. It's all fine. What you do is you before bed, maybe a half hour, an hour before bed, hopefully it's dark outside, or you can put, blackout blinds on and just pull the blinds so it's really dark in the room. And you take 2 or 3 of that child's favorite stuffed animals and you hide them in the room. Now, we're going to start with the biggest stuffed animals, and we're going to start with really easy hiding places. And we may or may not give them a flashlight. And we say, now you're going to go in there and you're going to find, make it a game, it's really fun. You're going to go in there and try to find this. Find these 3 things. And if you find them really fast and come out, you may or may not be timing them, but it's the point of just making it kind of fun, kind of a challenge. If you find them and bring them out and bring them to me, well then we can have a snack before bed or something like that, right? It's like incentivize it a little bit so it's fun. And so they go in there and it's dark and you go, it's okay, I'll be right here. And you might crack the door, right? So it's dark in there and they're feeling around. They might start with a flashlight because, again, what are we doing? We're trying to use fading techniques. So we're fading out in terms of starting with, making it as easy as possible, perhaps, and then moving toward being more difficult for the child. So it might even take about 4 or 5 of these little moments. The first time would be flashlight and one big stuffed animal that's right on the bed. And they walk in and they see it and they bring it out and you go, yeah, you did it. And so that might be it for the day. Tomorrow it's going to be 2 stuffed animals and they're a little harder to find, and so on and so forth. And then the third night, it's the same thing but now without the flashlight. You are so brave. You just did this 3 nights in a row. And so we're offering them exposure to what they fear. Useful? Good. Curtain calls, bedtime pass. The bedtime pass is actually a Boys Town little development. This is such a silly little procedure, and yet it got us on the Good Morning America show. Not me, but let's see, it was Pat Fryman, it was Connie, my colleague Connie in Omaha. That was her dissertation, as a matter of fact. Here's all it is. You have a token of some sort, and that could be a poker chip, it could be an index card that says bedtime pass on it. You guys ever heard of this before? No? And what you do is you say right before bed, this is bedtime problems, right? And they come out and all this stuff. You say, listen, I'm saying goodnight to you, but starting tonight, I'm going to give you this bedtime pass. Now, if you need anything at all after I say goodnight, you can call for me and I'll come in and you'll have to give it to me and I take it. I'll give it back to you tomorrow. But this is good, like redemption, right? It's redeemed for good. Let me start over. It's redeemed good for 1 minute of goodwill. So whatever you need, like a glass of water, or if you need to tell me something, something like that. And then, all right, good night. And you don't tuck them in lovingly like you did before. It's more matter of fact, but it's still, they're not in trouble. They're allowed to do this. And then, by the way, if you don't use it tonight, then you can trade it in tomorrow for ice cream for breakfast or something fun. Whoa. With chocolate. Dark chocolate at that. That's exactly right. Maybe all the above. That's right. And then the next night, or the next morning, if they didn't use it, then of course, as a parent, you're going to go, you did it. That's great. And by the way, what do you want for breakfast? They might say chocolate. All right. Or at least that's part of it. Okay, and then if they did use it, then you don't say anything. And the next night, you give it back to them, and you might review again what this is. You remember how this works? Good. Okay, if you need it, there it is. All right. Good night. And they might use it or not. But that's an elegant little behavioral intervention there. It works really, really well. You're essentially, from my perspective, it's a functional equivalent that we're training. You're essentially saying it's okay to get out of bed. It's okay to want to talk to me after I say goodnight. But you're doing it wrong. Let me give you a better way. And so now it's on your terms instead of on the child's. Yes, ma'am.
What, if any, modifications do you suggest to some of these strategies for kids that have more pathological issues, like they've experienced abuse
Oh,
in
yeah.
the bedroom, or they are already, I work with kids that are in foster care. And
Okay.
a lot of times there's past issues, but we don't want our foster parents to be sleep deprived either.
That's right.
So, and like you said, introducing this not only for the parents' sanity, but for the child's development of healthier
Yes.
sleep hygiene for the rest of their life.
I will start my response, my reply, by saying that one concern I have about trauma-informed therapy is that trauma-informed trained therapists are too rule-bound. They're too rule-governed in their work. And it seems to me that what a child needs, you do whatever it takes to move past it. But not everything the child is doing is because of the trauma, right? And just because a child went through a trauma, God bless him or her, I'm sorry that happened. It breaks my heart to hear some of the stories of Boys Town, actually. Not through the clinic as much as through the other programs that we have. But just because a child went through a trauma doesn't mean that we should tell the parents, go easy now. Don't give them any limits. Don't make them cry. That's unrealistic and we're going to be creating a narcissist. You know,
Totally agree.
right? It's going to be worse than the trauma.
And say, no, really, even though this child, because they're used to the responsibility, oh, well, and you've probably heard this across your populations, that a lot of parents,
Mm-hmm.
whatever venue they're parenting in, oh, but my child's different because.
Yeah.
Well, every child is unique.
Yeah,
because-
yeah. Every child is
and
unique.
yes, some of them have had, as you said, certainly more horrific experiences.
Yes.
However, at what point do we, how much modification, or is there a line in the sand that you would draw and say, no, just don't ever use this technique for a child that has a history of X, Y, Z?
Yeah. Okay. Every family brings their own story in. Every child is unique. Every family is unique. They come in with their own history, right? Okay. With that said, every kid needs limits, boundaries, consequences, and sleep. and the more they understand from consequences, not abusive consequences, but supportive, loving consequences, right? On the plus and minus side of the ledger. The more we develop their character, their resilience, their learning rate is so much higher when they have enough sleep. We need to get sleep rolling. How do we do that? We might have to make them cry at night. I'm sorry, but by the way, we've got some other tools than not just complete extinction. Like I said, we've got some other ways to kind of boil the frog. We can turn it up gradually, right, so that no one's upset. But I would not do this. This is, I guess, the punchline to all, or the bottom line to this, is that I wouldn't necessarily avoid complete extinction for a child who's been through a trauma. How's that? In other words, just because a child went through a trauma doesn't mean that tears are hurtful to them. Okay, that could be an extinction burst that needs to happen. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
Okay. Now, there are going to be some cases where if I hear the particulars, I'll go, ooh, you know what? Yeah, we got to go a different direction here. I admit that. But generally speaking, you're asking me a general question. The general question is that just because my answer generally is, just because there's a trauma doesn't mean you're going to do much different when it comes to solving problems. Make sense? We can't be anxious. Useful? Okay. By the way, I welcome discussion on that answer. Okay, so get my email address and shoot me an email if you have concerns or you want to talk about that more. Okay? Cool. Thank you for the question. That's one of those, the last 5 minutes of this, like when we were just talking, that's something that is so useful, I think. And yet, I don't think to talk about it. Maybe I should include it, like what do we do in specific circumstances? If you hadn't have brought that up, we would not have talked about that. I don't think so. Thank you. By the way, resilience, not victimhood. Resilience. That's what we need to push. And so behavior interventions, as far as I'm concerned, like what behavior analysts do for a living, is to empower families and to empower that child who had that trauma. Empower. We're moving forward. Good? Yes, ma'am.
I feel like in terms of the validation part that you're providing that neurobiological piece of the impact physically, psychologically, that lack of sleep has.
Yes.
Because even BCBA's raised children, and the first thing we think of is, I'm not going to psychologically harm this child.
That's right.
Anyway,
That's right.
Even though I understand it behaviorally differently. But we would never not nourish our children with food because we were afraid of upsetting them. Like we would always, we know vegetables because physically we vaccinate them because we know it's going to be better. We just talk ourselves through it.
Right.
But when they're crying in bed, we get into bed.
Yeah, yeah.
But that neurobiology for me, to me was validating because some of that self-talk that you would do, saying sleep deprivation is traumatizing. Prolonged sleep deprivation is traumatizing physically and psychologically. So it's like that's kind of like, so step one, letting a child baby cry, is step one in like feeding the healthy vegetables and the
That's right.
separating that objectively from parents, which is harder to do when you're obviously a parent and you're a professional.
That's right.
I found that really helpful. And I know we don't ever sit parents down and talk brain chemistry,
You know, I'm one that believes that behavior analysts need to be talking about anything that's going to solve the problem. It's education. And yes, you're right that having kids humbles you as a professional. You know, I tell people in my office, listen, you know, I've been doing this 20 years. I've got 15 letters after my name. We're rowing the same canoe. You know, when I get home, I forget what I'm teaching you. It doesn't occur to you in the moment. You have to stop and take a breath and open that door in your mind to it. There's no question. Need for parent to be present. There's the excuse me drill we talked about. Okay, can't quiet the mind. And so we've got a couple things here along with worry. Let me start with worry first. This is pretty cool. This is called worry time. Worry time. What you do is you say that every day between 3 and 4 o'clock you are allowed to worry. But if it's not 3 to 4 o'clock, you're not allowed to worry, or if you are, I'm not part of this. So you know, if you're using this little intervention at all, it's probably because you're saying goodnight to your child and your child is worrying about something. Like, but I don't want to be alone. Or, you know, anything that kind of just tugs at your heartstrings as a loving human being. And so basically what you say is, well, hon, it's not worry time. You can worry about that tomorrow. Good night. And then leave. And you can fade that too. Lots of different ways to fade that out. So you must worry for 15, oh actually, yeah, that's part of it. You must worry. It's not just that's the time to worry. It's like, no, I want you to worry for 15 minutes right now. Go. What? No, let's worry about what you were worrying about last night. Okay, now 15 minutes, now 5 minutes, and so on. Okay? Can't quiet the mind on top is relaxation strategies. We can talk about that real fast. In fact, what time is it here? It's 3:30. We're good. What are we going? 4 o'clock. 4. Let's do this as a group, okay? I promise you this won't get too weird. First off, let's do 3 deep breaths. I don't care if it's your mouth or your nose. What I want you to do is just sit comfortably and just take 3 deep breaths. Breathe in really, really deeply so that you expand your lungs to the point where every capillary is grabbing oxygen from that air you're bringing in. Hold your breath for a good second and then let out really, really slowly. Next, I want you to make fists. Go ahead, make fists tighter. Relax your arms. Really focus on your hands, okay? Tighter. Now let go. Do you feel how relaxed your hands feel? Do the same thing with another muscle group. It could be your face, scrunching your face up. It could be your toes. It could be your stomach muscles. But go ahead and do that one more time. This time, when you make fists or when you tighten your muscle groups, breathe in. And when you breathe out, relax. The last thing I want to do is I want you to listen to the sounds in the room. If your stomach is growling, listen to that too. Any sound that you hear. And try to catalog that in your mind. What am I hearing at the same time you're breathing in and out? Go. What did you hear? What did you hear? Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a few other odds and ends, right? Now, the big question, well, 2 questions. 1, how do you feel? Not bad, right? Not bad. By the way, there's all kinds of different variations of what we just did. That's kind of streamlined for our purposes here, right? Lots of other different things we could throw in there. But the biggest question is, what were you thinking about during that exercise? the air conditioning. You know, so lots of things were going on during that exercise. One of which is you have to know that you go into fight or flight response when you get anxious or you worry or nervous. And by the way, it's not just us. Think about the kids we're talking about here. They don't have the same life experience and wisdom that we have, okay? So they don't know what's going on. They just know they feel weird and they don't like it, okay? So when you go into fight or flight response, what happens is that among other things, the musculature around your rib cage begins to contract. And when that happens, it's keeping your rib cage from expanding to accommodate the normal amount of breath. So that's why people start getting short of breath during moments of anxiety. They can't get enough in. And then they start getting lightheaded because of it. When you force that deep of a breath in, what you're doing is you're setting up kind of a feedback loop, biofeedback loop, where you're pushing outward on the musculature, which forces it to relax. And you do that a few times in a row. And if you do that every time you feel a spike of anxiety, then you're training your body to relax because you're telling it to. Okay? Now, why can't we just share that with kids? That's why I take people through that like that, because now you've got the entire intervention. Now you can just hand it to them. Okay? You can add more to it. You can take some pieces out if it works for you that way. It's okay. But anyway, relaxation strategies, that's it there. Delayed sleep onset, sleep fairy. I mentioned Connie before, Connie Schnoes, Dr. Schnoes. She, a few years ago, wrote a book called The Sleep Fairy. And it's not that expensive, and it's really thin. It's written as a bedtime story for kids. All right? And it's pretty cool. Like the tooth fairy, you fade the schedule as well. So instead of, you lost a tooth, good for you, put it under your pillow, go to bed, fall asleep, the tooth fairy will visit. It's the same kind of thing, same kind of idea. So what we're doing is we're essentially saying that you need to fall asleep, and when you're asleep, the sleep fairy will visit. Now that can be anything. I mean, there's lots of ways of doing this. It could be $1 under your pillow for 3 nights, or $1 and then 50 cents and then 25 cents and fade it that way. Lots of different ways to do it. But that's pretty good. Another variation of the sleep fairy is something I do more than the sleep fairy, and that is what I call the sleep check. The sleep check. And what that means is, as a parent, you can say, okay, now I'm going to be saying goodnight right now. When I say goodnight, I'm going to leave. I'm going to do dishes or something. I need to do some other things. But then once I'm done, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to see if you're asleep. And if you are asleep, then something good happens tomorrow, like ice cream for breakfast or something like that, right? So what does that do? That makes a child much more likely to pretend to be asleep. What happens when kids pretend to be asleep? They fall asleep. And not only do they fall asleep fast, but you don't even need to go in. You can just say that they did it and do it again tomorrow. You do that for about a week. Child sleeping well. These silly little interventions, they're so powerful. They can be. Exactly. Same thing. Same idea. Same idea.
I used your bedtime class that you presented for us about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
My younger husband.
Did it work?
It did. And the funny thing is she doesn't want to trade it in. She wants to keep it.
Yeah. That was motivating to her to actually have it. Yeah.
It worked.
Tangible function. That's good. That's good. Okay. So hard to wake. If a child is hard to wake, let me tell you a little story real quick. For the first 5 to 10 years of my career, out of 21 so far, that came up a lot in clinic, which is, one thing I'm having is that one problem I'm having is that my child will not get out of bed in the morning, and it's throwing our whole schedule off, and it's terrible. And there's lots of yelling in the house and all this stuff. I mean, it's like a big deal, right? I mean, it's really throwing everything off. And so for the first, like I said, 5 or 10 years of my career, I was brainstorming, trying to come up with and develop these behavioral interventions to get the kid out of bed. And everything from token economies to, to timed interventions, to like a time contingency, to tipping the bed. And then it occurred to me when I started to really dive into sleep medicine, he just needs more sleep. That's all. Okay, so if you get enough sleep, you're going to wake up on time. And you're going to be ready to go. Parents should have nothing to do with wake up. Does that make sense? If the parent has to get, I mean, I can't tell you how much time I wasted not knowing that piece, and how much energy I wasted, and how many essentially ineffective interventions I recommended without that piece. Child needs more sleep. So if you're having problems in the morning, you need to back bedtime up. If the child is not going to bed at bedtime, then we need to get some other interventions in place to make that be practiced more easily. That's true, that too. But nonetheless, though, I mean, let's see what's in our toolbox for this. Let's fix this. And if they're getting enough sleep, but yet they're really just kind of like rubbing their eyes still, and it's really hard to get them out of bed, well, then you can go in about 20 minutes before time to wake them up, turn on the light, and leave. And then in 20 minutes, walk in and go, good morning. Because, again, that's a Zeitgeber, isn't it? We want melatonin to stop flowing. There's light in the room now. You can open up the curtains, not like that, but, just gently, quietly, and then tiptoe out. And that's going to make it easier. I like to say that all behavior analysis is making some things more probable and some things less probable. That's all. That's all we do. If you have another way of thinking about that, let me know. But I think that encapsulates it. We want an easier morning routine to be more likely. And so that's what we're talking about here. Okay. More iron for limb movement and also restless leg syndrome. Also, by the way, if they're getting plenty of iron and they still feel that way, well then relaxation strategies and adding a stretching component. I guess you asked earlier about yoga. Yoga could be good for that because you're stretching. It's essentially just kind of relaxing the body. And that could be enough to again, make it less likely that will be a problem. Non-REM parasomnias, earlier bedtime, more consistent routines, scheduled awakenings before usually occurs. Let's talk about that, scheduled awakenings. If a child is routinely sleepwalking, sleep talking, night terrors, anything in the first third of the night in deep sleep, and it's enough to bug the parents enough to tell you about it, then here's something that's easy to do, that's easy to tell them. Usually what happens is that if the kid is going to bed at a good bedtime, so we're talking about, let's say 8 or 9 o'clock, the parents are usually up at least another hour or two, right? So when they are getting ready to go to bed, right before they get in bed, that's usually right in the middle of deep sleep for the child. And if we know about when the parasomnia typically shows up, we try to beat that by about 10 or 15 minutes, maybe a half hour during deep sleep. And so what we say is, right before you go to bed and or try to time it to where it's right before it usually occurs, go in and wake him up, and he'll come out like this, but still groggy, and just say, good night, and then leave. That's it. And what you're doing there is you're just disrupting the sleep cycle. And that seems to solve the problem, at least for that night. And then you could do that for a couple weeks in a row, and then that lowers the probability of that problem. In addition to making sure they're getting enough sleep and it's consistent. I don't know why that works, but it works. Interesting? Okay, refraining from waking during the parasomnia, not before, but during. And refraining from talking about the parasomnia tomorrow, because all you're going to do is embarrass and scare the child because they don't know they have no memory for it. By the way, something else about sleep terrors. Again, the only one that's terrified is the parent. during a sleep terror. And so if a parent is responding to that by shaking the child, wake up, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, and then the child comes to, that's frightening to the child to wake up in that moment. What's going on? What? And so the best thing to do is just to keep them safe. Don't let them fall out of bed. If they're sleepwalking, just walk them back. And that's it. Keep them safe, that's all. Don't talk about it the next day. And then, like I said, no time for sleep due to homework or late sports. Priorities in order, and this is my idea, should be sleep, homework, family, and sports. So if you're not getting enough sleep, sleep is first. Homework, family time, like movie time, that kind of thing, and sports are what we sacrifice. Sports is sacrificed first. Family time is sacrificed second if you can't fit both of those in. Homework is sacrificed. Sleep is most important. If we get that right, well, then the child's homework time will be more efficiently spent. And family time will be nicer. Do you see that? So there are a lot of reasons why I ordered it this way. Once again, we're trying to give parents a heuristic to follow, a little decision rule. It doesn't work all the time because, like I said, you've got some dads, for example, who are the coach on the team, and that's okay. You know, sometimes they say no, and I say, okay, well, I'm only an advisor to your family, and I'm glad you're here. You know, it's okay. Bless you, sir.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Now, resources. Let's talk about this. I put a few more on here for this talk, rather than there are a few of these were on here for last talk. If you're interested in any of in anything that I've been saying here, I would really recommend having these books on your professional shelf. Sleep Better, top left, that's by Mark Durand. He's a fellow behavior analyst. The Meltzer-Crabtree book on the bottom left, Pediatric Sleep Problems, is a fantastic book. Fantastic. There's Judy Owens. She's at Brown, I think. Owens and Mendel. Take Charge of Your Child's Sleep. That's a great book as well. You don't need all of these, but I have all of these. I mean, it's like it's not bad to have a selection of these on your shelf. The one on the top right is a great little book written by a Boys Town person, Pat Fryman. Those of you who are behavior analysts know that he was our national president about 5 years ago. He wrote this little book. It's like $8 on Amazon, and it is really easy for parents to read. It's written for parents. If you Google "Good Night, Sweet Dreams," you'll get the book. And then there's also, I discovered Autism Speaks and the Autism Training Network did us a nice service, if we're talking about autism, with the toolboxes right here. They call them toolkits. Okay, so you can Google Autism Speaks, Autism Treatment Network, or ATN, and then Sleep Toolkit. And you'll find 2 of those. And you just have to sign up. You just have to give your email address, and then they will email it to you as a PDF. And it's pretty cool. You can recommend that to parents as well. Okay? And that's that. So we've got a little bit more time. I can take some more questions. What thoughts do we have?
Do you, in terms of working with the pediatrician, do you ever ask them, request maybe a vitamin screening to make sure that their blood levels are like vitamin D, which impacts sleep?
Absolutely, yeah. I do sometimes.
Doing those kind of prophylactic kinds of things before you move into other...
If there's, it's not just because of poor sleep that I would recommend that, or that I would ask for that. If there are other indicators, other red flags in the history, well then perhaps I might talk to the physician about, okay, we could do this and this, or we could do this and this, but do this instead, so that we don't have to do a blood draw, something. Like we work together to figure out what's best. Yeah, yep. Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
You spoke about nutrition.
Yes.
What would be something for me, milk was everything.
Yeah.
But the mother says, no milk, because they wet
Ah,
So they have water,
okay.
and I don't think water is like a relaxer, like milk was like just a not cold or
Milk seems to be a relaxant before bed. We don't understand why, and there's not sure data on that, but there's some data that show that.
So what if other than milk has relaxing?
Okay, all right. And you say that's to just get to bed, just falling asleep, just relaxing,
Yeah.
right?
Like
Okay.
an hour before bed, they should have at least something.
What's her concern?
That they're gonna wet the bed.
Okay, so for everybody online to hear the question is, the parent doesn't want to use milk, but water maybe, but not milk, right?
Yeah, water, they will have a sip.
A sip of water just to wet the palate, right? Exactly, because they're afraid that the child will wet the bed. There is good data, believe it or not, and this surprised me, still does, that when in cases of kids who wet the bed, the question is, well, should we keep them? Should we restrict fluids before bed? And it turns out that that studies have been done on that, looking at whether or not, giving them whatever they want to drink right before up to going to bed, or restricting it for an hour or two right before bed. No difference as far as bedwetting.
What is something they can eat?
Yeah. Well, no. What I'm telling you is that milk is okay. Milk, water. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, yeah. She's not here.
What would be another thing that I could give the child? She gives them popcorn.
Yeah.
Popcorn is pretty good.
I don't think food. Milk is something that we have some data on that for some reason it helps sleep on set. I tend to think, as a behavior analyst, I tend to see that as a classical conditioning piece. I don't think it's the milk. I think it's probably what it's associated with, right? But having said that, though, child doesn't eat anything before bed.
No?
Nope.
No banana.
Hug and a kiss.
That's it?
Hug and a kiss. That's it. Good night. That's it. But maybe popcorn is all that's needed. In other words, maybe popcorn is fine. That's what I meant to say. Popcorn might be fine, but it doesn't add anything, I don't think. Yes.
I'm not sure if this is a factor in what the question was, but
Yeah.
I know medical professionals and dental professionals don't want anything with sugar right before bed because of the sugar sitting on the teeth all night.
That's right.
In extreme cases, I've seen children with, their teeth rotted from always
Right.
being put to bed with that bottle, whether
That's
it was
right.
because they were hungry or it was the soothing object. In some cases,
I'm listening.
I think they'll suggest if the child needs an object to give them, like appropriate size container. Obviously, we don't put infants to bed with excess bedding or anything like that, or with bottles. But sometimes transitioning from a food object to a smaller transition type or security object. We always used to have our security blankets and our pennies and things.
Yep.
That might be healthier per se if there was a concern about actually giving something that's going to, be a dental health issue. Or
Right.
another health issue.
Well, and yeah, we're thinking about, those of us who are helping professionals, we want to help in every way. We want to make sure that we're not missing any piece. And so that's a good point.
Dental anxiety. They won't be able to sleep because of
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
I'm sorry, could you go back to the previous slide? I wanted to take a picture.
Of course. You bet. There you go.
My phone just died.
Oh no.
Is there any research on the use of magnesium? Would that fit with the eye?
That's outside the realm of behavioral health, but it might be in sleep medicine. I don't know. I haven't dug that far. By the way, guys, I want to make this point. I know a lot about sleep health because I've been given talks on it, and I do this work in clinic. In fact, I'm one of the founding members of the Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine. But having said that, I'm not a sleep specialist. I never took the exam for that. I don't have those letters after my name. I guess I don't need it. But the point is, here's my point about this whole thing. I'm knowledgeable and interested in this topic because it's useful. Not because I was trained in it necessarily. I wasn't trained in it. But I find it so fast. There's so much more to learn. And I get so much mileage out of this when I use it with families. So that's why it's kind of crept into my repertoire. It's been reinforced over time, you know. I'm on a rich schedule.
Have you noticed increased sleep problems?
You know what? I don't know if
Over your years of practice?
I don't know if it's increased as much as it's always been high, at least among the restricted sample we see. I suspect that.
How much have you seen with the increased use of electronic devices in kids, especially starting with much younger ages? It used to be that,
Yeah.
now it's hard to go anywhere and not see a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old holding
I know.
a phone or a device. How much have you seen just anecdotally in your practice on, the link between that and the
It's
sleep hygiene?
It's ubiquitous. Until you said anecdotally, I was thinking I was going to say, well, that's an empirical question. Somebody needs to do the research. They may have already done it, but anecdotally, good Lord, man, it's a problem. Keep in mind once again what we talked about when we first started this talk, that in order, a lot of time, in most cases, I'll say in most cases in child clinical work, you have got to do, at least in your mind, a behavior analysis of the parent's behavior as well. You've got to think about all the interactions. You've got to think about all the different maintaining variables that are impinging upon everybody's behavior, everybody's choices, if you will. Okay, you untangle it and figure it out from there. Why does the child have so much access to that tablet? Why is that? You know? So that's not a problem with the child. That's a problem with structure. That's a problem with the parent perhaps not knowing about what happens, especially right before bedtime when they're staring at that little sun, right? So education, but also strong, smiling recommendations. This is what we need to do now, and parents can take it or not, but if they do, it tends to be effective. Okay, but that's a great question. It's only going to get worse.
I'm literally just really fearful to see in 20 or 30 years from now what the long-term effects of some of this are going to be.
Yeah.
Some of the things that we've seen in the short term are frightening enough.
Yeah.
And the long-term stuff is, I work in the field, but I have 4 children of my own,
Mm-hmm.
varying ages, and my 14-year-old is sure that I'm the coolest mom in the world because his device has a bedtime and
Yeah.
a bedroom. And
That's
it's
right.
my bedroom.
That's right.
Oh, look, 14, every other kid I know. I'm like, yeah, and I sat there at open house and listened to your math teacher talk about, flat out just told the parents, which I was complimented him for afterwards.
Yeah.
He said, your kids are Snapchatting and texting and doing this stuff at 2 o'clock in the morning, regularly on school night.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm thrilled if they want to get on, line and do their homework kind of thing, but they shouldn't be doing it at 2 a.m. and at midnight. And
Yeah.
parents think that the kids went to bed. And like I said, I'm knocked out. By the time I go to sleep, I couldn't tell you what's happening in the other rooms
Can
all
I
the time.
can I tell you when we're talking about electronics and preteens and teenagers, at night the cat is away, and they're going to be on their devices. So it is a fundamental rule that I have for the families I work with, that they have a charging station far away from the child's room for everything.
It is next to my bed.
Yeah, in the trunk of your car is best.
My husband even said the one night, he's like, don't you think this is a little ridiculous? And I'm like, no. I said, twice I've already caught one of the kids coming in here trying to get it.
That's right.
He thought I was asleep.
That's right. And you know what? and
Seriously?
I know, and I have to tell the parents also, I need to steal their spines a bit. I need to help them, know how to withstand the gale forces, the gale force winds that, your mom, why are you being mean? How come, everybody else gets access to this and you're not giving it to me? You say, you know why? It's because I'm knowledgeable and because I love you.
Some of the time
That's why we're doing this.
they become so addicted to it too that it's a whole issue to help them.
That's right.
through that.
Yeah, well, you know what? I think that will likely be an APA division one day, You know, I think, you know, like there's gambling addiction and those kinds. There's going to be internet addiction, like.
That are getting the reinforcement, the dopamine reinforcement.
That's right.
It's getting that
You get, well, that's with gaming going back 15 or 20 years. Excuse me. Is that with gaming, you get immediate reinforcement. You know, you're like, especially first-person shooter players and things like that. You get immediate reinforcement. You think something, and you know, you think go left, and then the character goes left, and so you're getting immediate reinforcement on a rich reinforcement schedule. Nothing else. Nothing competes with that. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing that powerful in your life, which means that it's got to be rare, or at least contingent upon doing well in school, giving me, you know, good reports from the teacher, being a good brother or good sister in the house, being a good citizen generally, right? If all that's there, doing well in school and helping me with chores without being told, okay, yeah. But an hour before bed, you got to turn it off. Hand it to me. You know, it's like that's, you know, to be an effective parent, you've got to piss your kids off sometimes, especially middle and high schoolers.
I got over that a long time ago.
Yeah, yeah, and the parents who don't mind doing that and seeing the bigger picture, they tend to be the more successful parents. The ones who are floundering just need permission sometimes, right? I find.
Validating that,
Yeah.
you know, it's okay, don't let
Because I know
Yes.
the difficulty in my 13-year-old is in a charging station away, and my 17-year-old is right by her bed. And it's an issue, and there's some natural contingencies happening with her for that she's not picking up on as quick as I had hoped.
Yeah.
But the behavior analysis side of it is it's a SD for social engagement.
Yes, sure is.
What it is. So we have this device, which is also, and the reason why it's by her bed is because it wakes her up. We're working on
Right.
executive functioning side
That's
of
right.
life.
Yes.
But so this is where our alarm clocks are. And
Yeah.
you know what? They're not making the most efficient alarm clocks anymore. When our power goes out 17 times in a
Yeah,
year,
right.
so does the alarm clock. So we're all using these.
Yep.
But it's so the learning piece of that is it's an SD for social engagement, and it's always there.
You know, you can go on Amazon and buy an old-timey wind-up clock that is reliable as hell. You can do that. $5. You can.
And then the other piece is that we use them as the reading devices.
Merry
as
Christmas,
well.
happy birthday, here's your alarm clock.
For teenagers as well, which is
Yeah.
then also an SD for social engagement because we're using the iPads as
Right.
reading devices. So it's a rabbit hole.
You know, I was on Facebook for like 6 or 7 years until a few months ago, and I said, you know what, I'm going to take a break. And only then did I realize after a couple days that Facebook might as well have been a chip implanted in my head. I was under such, like you said, it's an SD. It's you see the phone, you're going to pick it up and check Facebook. Boy, I'm free now. I got plenty of time. It's interesting. Yeah, I'm on Snapchat. Yeah, Snapchat. Yeah. Now, yeah, exactly. No, it's amazing. So I mean, there's so many angles to that question, and it's relevant for us too. You know, that's another thing too, is that I worry about what's happening with parents. I worry about the adults because you know, with our generation, my generation, Facebook allowed me to get in touch with people I haven't talked to for 15 years. It was like, wow, where are you now? You know, it's like, it's kind of cool. It's kind of nice to rekindle those friendships. But having said that, I'm unavailable while I'm going back and forth. I'm unavailable to my children at the moment, and I don't know if that's good for them or for me, right? So that's another factor there that made me think, you know what, let's try something new. Yeah, it's my life's more fun now, so it's funny. Okay, anything else, guys? It's been an honor to serve you today. So thank you very much.
You too, you too.
So September last week to talk about.
So, yeah, so they must have looked at Broward.
That's it, safety.
How are you?
True.
Okay, yeah, that's a great idea, great idea. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, he just needs to get some experience, and the problem that Steve was saying is that we work all with passwords, and it's really, we can't really do that. Which I don't know what I need when I walk in. And I shared that with him, I called him one night and talked with him, and then, when his mom called the other day, I shared that with her as well. Yeah, yeah. In the email, I think I put your, Josie's who was the person who got, Jeff. And she was able to.
That's so true.
She can reach out.
Every time,
She's
like, under 100,
with, that's with the Boca Half Center, but she's also.
I just need to read